Chapter 375. On the calm ocean, 6 huge transport ships sailed in an orderly manner. The moment the mercenaries had finished assembling, Liao Tinga's fleet sailed out of the dock. Because they had already prepared for a long time, they didn't need to spend much time preparing. Among the 6 ships, 5 of them were Liao Tinga's men, and the last one was the newly assembled mercenaries. However, there were also quite a few of Liao Tinga's men on this ship. Otherwise, it would look like they were going to deliver their heads to the enemy. The ship was still quite relaxed, and it wasn't as depressing as imagined. Although the large group of people were touching the weapons at their waists, they were alert and prepared to deal with any unexpected situation at any time. The sea within 10,000 nautical miles of Nirvana City is a safe zone. There's no need to be so alert. Relax, everyone. The captain of the mercenary ship, who had been sailing in the East Sea for many years, said while drinking wine. He was an old sailor who was known as Old Sly. Old Sly looked to be in his 30s or 40s. His body was very sturdy, and his white beard had grown a circle. Even his hair was white, making him look very old. There were many hideous scars on his dark face, and he even wore an eye patch over his left eye. It wasn't hard to imagine how serious his injuries were. If he wore a headscarf, he would look like a pirate. He hit it off very well with these mercenaries and chatted nonstop along the way. This ship sailed at the rear left, and the other 5 ships surrounded the ship in the middle. These ships weren't made of ordinary wood, but were all made of precious materials. Under the sunlight, they emitted a metallic luster and looked very hard and difficult to break. Liao Tinga's 2 seed disciples weren't seen on this ship, so they were probably on the largest ship in the middle. It was a dragon-headed ship that was made of 8th grade materials. It was 1,000 meters long and looked like a pavilion on the sea. Its white sails fluttered in the wind, and it looked very luxurious. Its entire body was crimson red, and thick armor covered the deck, faintly emitting a majestic energy. Yin Nuoxing and the others stood at the stern of the ship, enjoying the cool sea breeze. Their long hair fluttered in the wind, and they felt very comfortable. This place was much quieter than the center. Perhaps it was because the combat strength they had just displayed had shocked everyone. But at this moment, no one came over. It made their ears feel much more comfortable. They were happy that no one came to disturb them. Ming and Little Purple Soul were running back and forth at the end of the boat. They seemed to have an endless supply of energy. Ever since Little Purple Soul returned, Ming would play with her whenever he had the time. Yin Nuoxing and the others could not help but exclaim at the same time. It's good to be young. However, when they were lamenting this sentence, they seemed to have forgotten that they were only young people in their 20s. Putting aside Yin Nuoxing, who always felt that she was old, Xian and Yuan, she were not as old as him. What's wrong, lads? It's the right of the old to be lamenting about how short life is here. Young people should be more energetic. A strong and loud laughter came from behind, causing Yin Nuoxing and the others to be stunned. They turned their heads and saw Old Cunning walking towards them with a pot of wine. He even raised his head and took a big gulp. Then he stomped the wine pot on the edge of the ship and laughed. Oh, this old man was wrong. There's a little girl here. Old Cunning laughed and said, "What's wrong, lads? Are you homesick after just going out to sea?" Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing and the others could not help but laugh. Shaking her head, Yin Nuoxing said in a low voice, "No, I'm just thinking about the road ahead. Looking at the boundless ocean, where is the other shore? Where is the end? The road ahead is the other shore. The road ahead is the end. As long as we keep going forward, we can reach the place we want to go." Old Cunning laughed and took another gulp of wine. Then he said something that Yin Nuoxing and the others could not understand. "Young people, cheer up. You have the capital to be young. It's important to enjoy the moment, but it's also important to work hard. Only those who dare to risk their lives are considered young." Old Cunning stroked his beard and laughed. "Ah ha ha ha." After saying this, Old Cunning raised his head and took another big gulp of wine. Then he laughed and walked away, leaving Yin Nuoxing and the others confused. 10 days passed in a hurry. Every day, they would see a fireball rise from the east and be kicked to the west by the moon. The cycle repeated again and again. What remained the same was the calm ocean. It was always blue, and there were no more waves. During these 10 days, no one visited the area at the stern of the ship. It was as if it had become the exclusive territory of Yin Nuashing and the others. Other than Old Cunning, who would come over every day to chat and drink with Yuan Shi, Yin Nuashing would have the thought of kicking them into the sea every time she saw the two men standing at the stern of the ship with their arms around each other's shoulders and drinking wine with the moon. Brace yourselves, lads. Let me see your weapons. The peaceful days have come to an end. Next, it's time for you to show your skills. Early in the morning, Old Cunning stood at the highest point of the ship and looked down at the people below. His single eye flashed with an intimidating light. He carried a huge longsword without an edge on his shoulder. At first glance, it looked like a big club. It was 10 feet long, and when he swung it, the whistling sound of the air could be heard. Old Cunning roared at the top of his voice, causing the veins on his forehead to pop out. His deep and sonorous voice clearly spread throughout the entire ship, causing everyone's bodies to tremble. They straightened their backs, and then, in unison, they pulled out the weapons that were either pinned to their waists or kept in their mystic artifacts. Each and every one of them was dazzling to the eye. Do you have the confidence to complete this mission? Old Cunning turned his neck and roared. Do you know what you have to do? Huh. Under these two roars that could swallow mountains and rivers, the group of mercenaries responded loudly. They raised the weapons in their hands high up into the sky. Beams of energy light shot up into the sky and condensed into an unparalleled battle intent. The few ships beside them were shocked. Yin Nuashing, who rarely walked out from the back of the ship, was also shocked and stunned. He looked at Old Cunning strangely. His ability to incite people was really off the charts. This group of people didn't have the tacit understanding that I had imagined. They got excited after I roared at them twice. Hee, these guys are very unruly. If I don't show them some imposing manner, I won't be able to incite them. My throat is already hoarse after I yelled at them. After making some arrangements, Old Cunning walked over. He lifted the wine pot pinned to his waist and drank a mouthful. He grinned and said, Next up is the Sea of Death. If I don't raise my spirits, no one here will be able to survive. The Sea of Death? Yin Nuashing asked doubtfully. This sea, or rather, we are about to pass by a sea abyss. There are countless corpses buried here. It is said that all ships that pass by here will sink. This is the first time I have come here. I want to see how it will sink. Old Cunning drank a mouthful of wine and said indifferently, You seem to have unknowingly said something terrifying. Hearing this, Yin Nuashing widened his eyes and said, Since you know that it will sink, why don't you change the direction? Moreover, Yin Nuashing looked around. It was a resplendent and glowing sea. It was exactly the same as what he saw a few days ago. He said, Moreover, I haven't seen any landmarks along the way. How do you know that this is the so-called Sea of Death? That sea abyss? Little fellow, you are still too young. Old Cunning laughed loudly. He drank a mouthful of wine and panted for a while. He said, This old man has spent most of his life in the Eastern Sea. I know where I am even with my eyes closed. This sea abyss is too long. If we go around it, we will have to walk a very long distance. That time is enough for us to go back to Nirvana City and come here dozens of times. We don't have that time now. Everyone knows? Yin Nuashing raised his eyebrows and asked, Anyone who has sailed the sea knows. Old Cunning smiled and said, This is also the reason why Liao Tinga spent so much effort to summon another ship. He was worried that there would not be enough manpower. He was worried that we would encounter an unexpected situation here and end up with no eggs left intact. There has to be a reason, right? Why would ships sink here? Yin Nuashing asked. It was his first time coming to the Eastern Sea. Naturally, he did not know anything. There are countless dangers in the Eastern Sea because there are endless secrets in the sea. Old Cunning grinned and said, I'm not too sure about what I've heard, so I won't tell you. You'll know why when we reach that area. Old Cunning laughed loudly and patted Yin Nuashing's shoulder. Then, he turned around and walked towards the bow of the ship. Hearing this, Yin Nuashing rolled his eyes. This old man was still keeping him in suspense. Looking at the noisy deck, Yin Nuashing shook his head helplessly. He turned around and returned to the stern of the ship. He saw Xian and Yuan, she playing with Ming. He could not help but smile and walked over. Seeing Yin Nuoxing walking over, Xian put down Ming and looked up at him. He was stunned and could not help but ask, "What's wrong? You look gloomy." Gloomy? Yin Nuoxing's cheeks trembled. He said, "Is it that obvious?" "It's very obvious. Did something happen?" Yuan she nodded. Just now, Yin Nuo planet had heard a big commotion at the bow of the ship, so she went to take a look. She didn't expect that when she returned, it would be overcast. It seemed that they had heard some bad news. "There's something." Yin Nuoxing sighed and told them what Old Cunning had told him. "It feels very dangerous." Yuan Shi listened and looked surprised. However, there was not much panic on his face. Yin Nuoxing shrugged. He was not worried about falling into the sea, but he was afraid of encountering something in the sea. The sea was not their battlefield. They could not smash it. For Yin Nuoxing, who had destructive tendencies, the sea was really a place to suffer. After a moment of silence, Yin Nuoxing took out a few jade bottles from his pendant and put them in the hands of Xian and the others. Looking at their puzzled expressions, he could not help but smile and said, "Water avoidance pill. It can allow the user to adapt to the underwater environment, although it was not refined by me." At the end of his sentence, Yin Nuoxing stuck out his tongue. This water-repelling pill was at the immortal grade, and one pill could last for a long time. Naturally, it was not refined by him. It was given to him by Xianin. He found it in a pile of Medicine Mountain. It seemed like it was prepared for him to enter the East Sea, and there was a lot of it. Yuan Shi listened and opened the bottle cap with interest. A wave of intoxicating pill fragrance drifted out, causing his whole body to tremble. He carefully tilted the jade bottle and took out a blue pill. He looked it in his hand and suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. He was so surprised that his mouth was wide open. On the blue pill, there were patterns of 7 colors. The connection between each 2 colors was seamless, like a few ribbons. He could faintly feel an extremely large amount of energy flowing in it. The dense pill fragrance even drifted to the few ships at the side, causing everyone to suddenly turn their gaze. However, before they could find the source of the pill fragrance, they lost the direction. What a rich pill fragrance! It must be at least the highest grade or above. Could it be that some alchemy master is refining pills here? No, refining pills of this level will cause strange phenomena. It is impossible to be so calm. Someone must have taken out the pill. It seems to be coming from the mercenary ship. At the stern of the ship, Yin Nuoxing covered the bottle with her hand. Her palm was emitting a golden light. She used her origin energy to isolate the jade bottle containing the water-repelling pill and put it into her pendant. Hearing the discussions, some cold sweat appeared on her forehead. She never thought that taking out the pill would cause such a big commotion in less than half a minute. Even Yuan Shi couldn't help but wipe his forehead. He leaned on the edge of the ship and looked at the horizon as if he didn't know anything. However, he couldn't help but send a voice transmission to Yin Nuoxing. F*CK. 7 colored patterns. 7 elemental alchemy master? Little star, when did you know such a terrifying person? One had to know that just gathering 7 elements was enough to frighten a god to the point of swallowing his tongue. To perfectly integrate 7 elements into a pill and promote it to a higher level. This method was simply unbelievable. Calm down, calm down, calm down. Yin Nuoxing sent a voice transmission and chanted a few times. Hearing this, Yuan Shi took a few deep breaths to calm himself down. However, his heart was still in a perilous situation. A 7 elemental alchemy master. In the entire realm of the gods, there were probably less than 5 of them. After waiting for a while, there was no more discussion. Yin Nuoxing heaved a sigh of relief and stuffed the jade bottle back to Yuan Shi. This time, the latter didn't dare to open it again and hurriedly put it into his artifact. Chapter 376. The next day, Yin Nuoxing and the other lazy bums got up unwillingly when they heard some noise from the ship. They opened their eyes and took a deep breath of the sea breeze that blew in through the small window. Then, they walked towards the deck. When Yin Nuashing and the rest arrived at the deck, there was already a group of people dressed neatly, standing in a group. They were even in a state of battle readiness. Yin Nuashing could feel their soaring fighting spirit. "Don't leave our side later, okay?" Yin Nuashing walked to a place where it was not too crowded. She put down Ming and Little Purple Soul and squatted down. Then, she rubbed their heads and said seriously, "Okay." The two girls nodded. Their four gem-like eyes stared at Yin Nuashing with a smile. Yin Nuashing did not know if they really understood what she said. Yin Nuashing frowned. After thinking for a while, she was still a little worried. She looked around and made sure that no one noticed them. Then, she nodded and took out a jade bottle. She condensed a trace of origin energy on her palm and dyed it golden. Then, she quickly took out 2 azure blue pills from the bottle and quickly closed the jade bottle. The golden light also surrounded the azure blue pills so that their energy could not leak out. After taking out 2 water-repellent pills, Yin Nuashing held one in each hand and stuffed it into Ming and Little Purple Soul's mouths. The two girls swallowed the pills with their eyes rolling. After a while, they swallowed the pills and said at the same time, "It's so sweet." Yin Nuashing staggered and almost hit her head on the edge of the ship. She was speechless. At the same time, she was a little confused. Did the pills have a taste? The azure blue ocean and the sky merged together in the distant horizon. The sun shone lazily on the cloudless horizon. The sea here was gradually approaching the northern part of the East Sea. The 6 ships were built with special materials and were quite fast. However, the sea was too monotonous. In the past 10 days, except for 1 or 2 ships at the beginning, there was not even a ghost in sight. There were not even seabirds in the sky, which meant that there was no land nearby. On the ship, Yin Nuashing and the others were leaning on the side of the ship as they looked at the faraway front and at the bow of the ship. Old Cunning had a stern expression on his face. Today, there wasn't even any sound of laughter. It was completely different from the relaxed and cheerful atmosphere of the past. He didn't even have the interest to go around and tease people to drink wine every day. He held the huge sword that was 10 feet long tightly and turned his wrist slightly, revealing the nervousness in his heart. The same scene was happening on the other ships as well. Yin Nuashing, with her sharp senses, had already sensed the activation of an array formation. Through her evil spirit eye, she could see that on the other ships, the people wearing the same clothes all had grave expressions on their faces. The Sea of Death seems to be quite dangerous. We haven't even arrived, and it's already making people so nervous. Yin Nuashing muttered softly when she saw the serious expressions on everyone's faces. After pondering for a while, Yin Nuashing sighed. The pattern on her arm glowed faintly. Then a few divine weapons floated out. Yin Nuashing grasped them in her hand and then handed them over to Xian and Yuan Shi, just in case. Yin Nuashing smiled and said. Xian and Yuan Shi also nodded. Looking at the tense atmosphere, they knew that something would happen later. It was better to be prepared in advance and have a divine weapon in hand than anything else. The rocking of the ship continued for about 3 hours before it suddenly stopped. At this moment, Yin Nuashing and the others who were laughing and chatting turned serious. She grabbed the 2 girls Ming and brought them back to her side. Looking ahead, they could see that the ocean not far away had suddenly turned dark blue, so dark that it was almost black. In the previous section of the journey, they could clearly see the mountain range under the water. But now, it was as if they had suddenly fallen from the surface of the sea to the bottom of the sea. The dark blue ocean was very wide. Looking horizontally, they couldn't see the end even after it disappeared at the end of their line of sight. With the help of the evil spirit eye, they could see the blue water in front of them about 10,000 miles away. In other words, the trench was 10,000 miles wide, and its length couldn't even be seen. When the 6 ships stopped, Yin Nuashing's soul power, which had been spreading out, suddenly heard the sound of weapons rubbing against each other. It seemed that this was the Sea of Death that Old Sly had mentioned. The 6 ships stopped for a while. Yin Nuashing could vaguely hear loud and clear shouts coming from the 5 ships, followed by a series of responses. Then, except for their ship, the other 5 ships quietly moved forward on the water surface. Compared to the speed in front, they were much slower. Boys, get ready to enter the Sea of Death. Are you prepared? While Yin Nuashing and the others were observing, Old Sly stood at the bow of the ship, waving his big sword and shouting in a deep voice. Huh! As Old Sly's shout fell, it was immediately followed by a series of responses with soaring aspirations. Charge! Old Sly shouted exaggeratedly. With a wave of his hand, the ships started moving again. Then, they slowly moved into the deep blue sea. Little guy, later on, if you have any skills, just throw them as hard as you can. If anything happens, I have a favor to ask of you. On the big ship in the middle, there are Liao Tiange's trusted subordinates. Try your best to take them away. Yin Nuashing took a deep breath. Just as he was about to open his evil spirit eyes to look under the water, a deep voice suddenly came from behind him. He was stunned and turned his head. It turned out to be Old Sly. Liao Tiange's 2 god seeds are much stronger than me. What can we do to help? When the time comes, we'll be lucky if we can protect ourselves. Yin Nuashing adjusted his hat, shrugged, and said, Hee, little guy, you still want to fool this old man. Hearing this, Old Sly laughed. Then, he patted Yin Nuashing's shoulder and said with a smile, Although this old man is old, I haven't reached the point where my eyesight is blurred. From the first time I saw you, I knew that you were definitely not a simple guy. Yin Nuashing rolled his eyes. What kind of look was that? He didn't do anything, yet he was labeled as not a simple guy. Hee, the stern of the ship is a good place to cool down. Do you know why those people don't go to the stern of a ship? It's because they're afraid of you guys. Anyone with a discerning eye can tell that you guys aren't easy to deal with. Seeing his expression, Old Sly laughed again. Only then did Yin Nuashing come to a realization. Back then, he chose the stern of the ship because it was a cool place. He was still wondering why no one followed him to cool down. So this was the reason. However, he was also a little confused. How could he tell that they weren't easy to deal with? They didn't do anything. He also dared to pat his chest and guarantee that no one recognized his identity as the divine physique of spiritual absorption. Otherwise, they would have killed him while he was at sea. The assassins didn't seem to have followed him. All right, I'll do my best. Yin Nuashing curled his lips and said with a smile. Hearing Yin Nuashing's words, Old Sly smiled with gratification. Then he said something, turned around, and walked back to the bow of the ship, closely monitoring the movements in the nearby sea area. At this moment, the fleet had already slowly entered the Sea of Death. No one knew what they were afraid of. The 6 ships were quiet. After the group of people entered, they also slowly closed their mouths. They were all conversing with their telepathic thoughts. It felt as if they needed to be sneaky when passing through this place, so as to avoid waking up something. On both sides of the ship, there were many people standing. They were all grasping their shining weapons in their hands. Pairs of eyes were vigilantly looking around. Yin Nuashing frowned and also walked to the side of the ship. His bright evil spirit eyes slowly opened and then looked down. His line of sight broke through the layers of seawater. He didn't know how deep the sea was. It had already become pitch black and nothing could be seen. Even with the evil spirit eye's unique piercing effect, he couldn't see anything. It was as if there were no living things underwater. Shaking his head, Yin Nuashing retreated from the side of the ship with Ming in his arms. He stood in the center of the ship, together with Xian and the others. The fleet did not encounter any problems amidst this tense atmosphere. Half an hour later, they arrived at the edge of this deep blue sea region. At this spot, one could vaguely see a green-blue color appearing in the distance. Clearly, they were about to reach the end. Seeing this, almost everyone heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts at the same time and patted their chests. And just as they heaved a sigh of relief, Yin Nuashing, who was standing quietly, suddenly shivered. He felt that something was staring at them. His soul power suddenly spread out from between his eyebrows, enveloping an area of 1,000 miles in an instant. Just as his soul power was released, the entire sea area suddenly trembled. Countless splashes of water surged, as if the sea was boiling. Then, Yin Nuashing sensed that something was rapidly approaching from the bottom of the sea. Damn it! Full speed ahead, we've been discovered. Looking at the movement in the sea area, Old Cunning's face instantly turned ugly. He roared angrily, and the large sword on his shoulder sliced through the air. He held it tightly in his hands. At this moment, the moment the shout fell, the ship suddenly emitted a bright light. The roaring sound of energy rolling resounded in everyone's ears. The same situation occurred on the other 5 ships. Then, the speed of the fleet suddenly increased by a lot. They turned into shadows and rushed out of the sea of death with all their might. Boom! Just as the fleet accelerated, the sea area in front of them suddenly expanded. A wall of water rose from the surface of the sea, forming a tsunami that was 1,000 feet high. It suddenly smashed down on the fleet. Damn it! Other than a storm, a fleet of ships was most afraid of encountering a tsunami. Moreover, it was this kind of unnatural tsunami. Every time they encountered one, it would definitely lead to the annihilation of the entire fleet. While everyone was in a daze, the 1,000 feet high wall of water, which was mixed with a great force, suddenly slammed down on them. Buzz! Before the tsunami came down, a soft buzzing sound came from the few large ships. Then, 6 huge barriers were suddenly propped up, forming an enormous barrier in mid-air. It enveloped the 6 ships and blocked the tons of seawater. Something's coming. Suddenly, Yin Nuashing shouted. Everyone who had just heaved a sigh of relief suddenly tensed up their bodies. They gripped their weapons with even more force. Boom! Just as Yin Nuashing shouted, the seawater in front of them suddenly exploded. Then, a crimson shadow broke out of the sea, shocking everyone. When they saw what it was, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. It was an octopus's leg, but it was 1,000 feet long. It was like a pillar that supported the sky. Densely packed suction cups moved on it, and each suction cup was 10 meters long. If it weren't for the suction cups on that tentacle, I would have thought that I saw a giant snake. Yin Nuashing swallowed. So disgusting. Xian's pretty face trembled. She quickly hid behind Yin Nuashing and clutched his clothes tightly. It was like an octopus leg dancing like a dragon. The moment it appeared, under everyone's horrified gazes, it smashed into the barrier below with a splash of water. On the other side, 7 crimson dragons soared into the sky and swept towards the fleet. Chapter 377. What entered his eyes was a deep blue. The cold seawater with a slight saltiness stung his eyes, and his taste buds gave him a taste of saltiness and bitterness. A series of roars faintly lingered in his ears through the thick seawater. In front of him, a red dragon that was thousands of meters long cut through the water, causing the seawater to churn violently. His blurry vision looked at the surface of the sea that flickered with spots of light. He saw the dragon dancing wildly, and things constantly fell from the surface of the sea. 6 huge pieces of wreckage were gradually sinking into the sea, and intense energy fluctuations came from the sky. In front of him, many slender black figures were moving the things that had fallen into the sea. Yin Nuashing shook his dizzy head and felt that his hands seemed to be grabbing onto something. Although he was a little dazed, he still subconsciously pulled the thing that he was grabbing onto tightly. Little star, little star. As if he heard someone calling him, Yin Nuashing was stunned. His vision was still blurry, and he pulled his hands back. It was as if he had used all his strength and could no longer do anything else. Little star, a sweet and clear, anxious voice clearly sounded in his mind. Although his consciousness was blurry, he could still tell that this voice should be Xian's. His soul power circulated rapidly, and his blurry consciousness became clearer. Before he could fully regain his consciousness, Yin Nuashing felt his mouth being pried open. Then a round thing was stuffed into his mouth and slipped into his body. It emitted a gentle azure light, and he suddenly felt his body become much lighter. Brother! He could feel a pair of small hands shaking his shoulders. Yin Nuashing blinked hard and finally recovered. 4 anxious faces came into view, and he was stunned. The scene just now was still replaying clearly in his mind. A few minutes ago, Yin Nuashing saw the octopus's foot break through the air and swing towards the boat. He subconsciously protected Xian and the others behind him and went forward alone. However, he was still swatted down along with the boat and fell into the sea. The sturdy boat that was made of special materials was smashed to pieces under the octopus's foot like paper. Almost everyone on the boat was swatted into the sea, and at this moment, those who still had strength were fighting on the sea. Shaking his dizzy head, Yin Nuoxing looked at the 4 people who were not injured and heaved a sigh of relief. He took the time to look at his hands. It turned out that he was holding on to Xian and Little Purple Soul. However, it should be said that Xian and Little Purple Soul were holding on to him. In his dizzy state, he did not react at all. If no one held on to him, he would sink. It would be fun if he drowned. Are you all okay? Yin Nuoxing smiled. After being swatted by the huge octopus's foot, even God and underworld masters would not be any better off. If it were not for the protection of the divine artifacts, he would have been smashed to pieces like those boats. It's okay, it's okay. Compared to this, it's more important to run. That's not an ordinary octopus. It has the bloodline of a dragon, and dragon scales can be seen on the octopus's body. It's out to look for food. Yuan Shi quickly shook his head. They were protected by dozens of divine artifacts and were not hit directly. They could see the octopus clearly. Oh, so we're here to deliver food? This tentacle monster has a really good appetite. Yin Nuoxing raised his eyebrows and smiled. Yeah, do you want to ask, Mr. Octopus, do you want to eat the boat first or me first? Yuan Shi smiled bitterly. It had seemed like they were here to deliver food, and they passed by when the other party came out to look for food. Let's find a place to hide first and wait for things to calm down before we go out, Yuan Shi said. Wait a minute. Don't be in a hurry to hide. I want to find something. Yin Nuoxing shook his head and smiled mysteriously. What are you looking for? Yuan Shi was stunned and asked. Yin Nuoxing raised his head and looked. At this time, there were not many people in the water. He did not know if they were hiding in the sky or had been torn to pieces. He could smell a little blood from afar, and he did not know how many people had died here. However, what Yin Nuoxing was interested in was not these. What he was aiming at was the wreckage, or rather, the core of the boat. Every magic tool has a core. Even if it's destroyed, as long as the core isn't damaged, it can be repaired. Moreover, these cores can be smelted again to strengthen the weapon. It's much better than raw materials. Yin Nuoxing said with a smile. So it can be used like this. Yuan Shi suddenly understood. He was not a blacksmith, so he did not understand the relationship on this level. Yin Nuoxing stuck out his tongue and let go of his 2 small hands. He rubbed Xian's head and said with a smile, You guys wait for a while. If anything happens, leave first. I can catch up with you. Xian nodded and asked softly, Is everything okay? Yin Nuoxing shrugged and handed a pearl condensed from rich light elements to Xian. He then turned around and disappeared, leaving behind a ball of dissipating light particles. The speed of light elements seems to be slower in the water. Yin Nuoxing, who had just flown out 1,000 meters, frowned. He had consumed the same amount of energy, but he felt that his speed was a bit slower. However, he soon forgot about this situation. Although it was a bit slower, it was still very fast. Yin Nuoxing carefully swam to the side of the sunken boat and poked his head out of the water to look around. When he saw that no one was paying attention to him, he sighed in relief. Boom! A violent explosion suddenly came from the sky. Dazzling energy exploded in midair, causing Yin Nuoxing to shrink his head. He carefully raised his head and looked at the sky. He could not help but be stunned. Ahaha! Old Sly raised a 3-meter-long greatsword and waved it like a windmill. He cut open countless wounds on an octopus leg in front of him. Dark purple blood fell like rain and dyed the sea into a different color. Outside Old Sly's body, a silver-blue wolf was howling. Lightning flashed all over its body, and every time those lightning bolts struck the scales on the octopus's feet, a series of ding, ding, dang, dang, dang sounds would ring out. The beast soul of the Thunder Wolf. Looking at the huge Thunder Wolf, Yin Nuoxing opened his mouth in surprise. The beast soul was unique to the body of a magical beast. If it was refined in the body, one could obtain the magical beast abilities. However, not everyone could refine it. Even if they could, it could only be refined once. In other words, once the bee soul was refined, it could not be refined again in this lifetime. Therefore, most people would wait until they found the best bee soul before choosing to refine it. Other than Old Sly, there were 5 other people who were also resisting with all their might. Although the 6 of them were resisting with all their might, it was obvious that they were not as strong as they wished. If this continued, defeat was only a matter of time. I don't want to see an octopus ever again in this lifetime. Looking at the densely packed suction cups on the octopus leg, Yin Nuashing felt disgusted and rolled his eyes. Shaking his head, Yin Nuashing returned his gaze to the sunken ship at the side. The netherworld ruin sword swept out and was held in his hand. With a slash, he cut the solid material into 2 halves and then entered it. The core of a magical weapon was the origin of the power output. It was the heart, and the power output of ship was usually at the bottom. Although there were a few layers of thick deck under the power of the netherworld ruin sword, any material was just a decoration. Therefore, Yin Nuashing touched the location of the magical weapon in just a few minutes. The core of the 7th level has been reforged. It's equivalent to 500 kilograms of 7th level material. The magic circles and charms that came with it are perfectly preserved. Looking at the core formed by the silver-blue magic circles, Yin Nuashing could not help but smile. Looking at the connecting lines that extended out from the core, Yin Nuashing casually waved his sword and cut them all into pieces. Then, he reached out and caught the core and put it away in his pendant with satisfaction. A small hole was opened in the wall of the ship. Looking out through the hole, Yin Nuashing could still see that a few people were retreating step by step. The octopus seemed to be able to absorb energy. Every time energy was shot at it, it would make it more powerful. Let's hope they can hold on for a while longer. Yin Nuashing nodded. He felt that there was no problem for the time being. He looked at the other ships and then rushed over. After working for half an hour, Yin Nuashing finally broke off the cores of the 6 ships. There were 5 7th level and 1 8th level core. The 8th level core was the largest ship in the middle. In fact, 7th and 8th level materials were not too rare, but they were not very plentiful either. Generally, people who were not rich and powerful would not choose to forge them into transportation tools. In addition to these cores, Yin Nuashing also dismantled parts of the wreckage of the other ships and put them away. After he was done with all this and stretched, he suddenly felt that it had become very quiet outside. He was stunned and quickly ran to the window to look out. Then, he sucked in a breath of cold air. He did not know when the battle outside had ended. The octopus and the 6 people were gone. The sea was so calm that there were no waves. Only a few sunken ships were bobbing here, but they would soon fill up with water and fall into the deep sea. When everything settled, the sea would return to its original state. No one would know that a massacre had taken place here. His soul energy shot out from between his eyebrows and enveloped an area of 1,000 miles around him. After that, he carefully investigated the area, but he couldn't find any traces of living beings. He immediately broke out in a cold sweat because even Yin and the others had disappeared. F***CK. Yin Nuashing was anxious. He suddenly rushed out of the cabin and dived into the sea. Now that the octopus had probably left, he did not have to deliberately hide any traces. He directly returned to his original position and was stunned. In his original position, although there were no traces of Yin and the others, there was a light yellow mark left behind. It was emitting a faint light in the sea. In the distance, there was also a similar mark, which seemed to be guiding him. Yin Nuashing looked at it and did not hesitate at all. Astral power surged out of his body, and he broke through the sea and swam quickly in the direction of the mark. Something's wrong. After swimming underwater for more than 10 minutes, Yin Nuashing felt that something was wrong. The distance he had traveled was too long, and he did not travel in a straight line. This meant that when Yin and the others left, they did not use the light element to leave. Moreover, it was impossible to leave such a neat mark even if they used the light element. Although he was puzzled, Yin Nuashing still swam down. After another 10 minutes, he had already left the area of the Sea of Death. The sea turned from dark blue to azure blue. He could vaguely see small mountains or platforms below. Clusters of colorful corals grew on the rocks. Seaweed several meters long swayed gently in the water. The sea fishes were swimming along the edges of the mountain walls. This place was like an underwater kingdom. However, when Yin Nuashing saw a huge sea anemone sticking to the mountain walls with dozens of tentacles dancing, he was disgusted again. He did not have time to look at such a beautiful scene and fled. Following the mark, he came to a cave under the mountain wall. Yin Nuashing hesitated for a moment, and his soul power surged out. When he sensed the aura of Xian and the others, he heaved a sigh of relief and swam in with ease. There was a huge empty space in the cave that was not covered by water. There were more than 10 people standing on the shore. Xian and the others, as well as Old Cunning and the others, were also there. It seemed that the latter had used some kind of method to escape from the fish's mouth. They were all wet. As soon as they came out of the water, a campfire rose slowly. The few of them leaned on the campfire to dry their clothes. Everyone looked gloomy. Obviously, this kind of thing had happened before they even reached their destination. This made them lose all their fighting spirit. Splash! Yin Nuashing's head popped out of the water, causing everyone to look at him vigilantly. When Old Cunning saw that it was Yin Nuashing, he laughed even harder. Ah ha ha! You really didn't die, kid. When Yin Nuashing heard this familiar laughter, he casually wiped his face. When his vision cleared, he saw that Xian, Old Cunning, and the others were all there. He heaved a sigh of relief, then rolled his eyes and hurriedly climbed to the shore. Brother, how have you been? I didn't expect you to get involved in this mess, too. On the other side, a man smiled inexplicably, causing everyone here to be stunned. Judging by his tone, could it be that the two of them knew each other? Liao Ming, Yin Nuashing sighed. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. Since he was here, he was obviously one of Liao Tinga's people, combined with the way the woman beside him addressed him. This Liao Ming was probably Liao Tinga's divine son. Chapter 378. Yin Nuashing rolled his eyes and stood up from the water. He looked at Liao Ming strangely. Although he had guessed it before, he never thought that he was Liao Tinga's son of God. After all, the first time they met was at the Ghost Forest. The latter was the young master of the Liao family who guarded that area. No one would have thought that he would be related to Liao Tinga, who was so far away. Xian reached out and pulled Yin Nuashing ashore. He took a towel and wiped his face, asking, "Are you okay?" Yin Nuashing waved his hand and smiled. When he finished taking the things, the octopus had already disappeared. Naturally, nothing would happen to it. Not bad, little brother. You're actually unharmed. Seeing that Yin Nuashing was still alive and kicking, some astonishment flashed across Old Cunning's eyes. Then, he patted his shoulder and laughed. This oceanic beast should be the heavy military force that guards the sea abyss border. Thinking about it this way, those ships that sank in the past have a reasonable explanation. That big fellow has the strength of an underworld king elite, and it also has the bloodline of a dragon, which makes it even more powerful. Guards. Yin Nuashing's face twitched. This explanation is quite interesting. So what do we do now? Yin Nuashing asked as he casually removed the water on his body with water elements. What do we do? Of course, we have to save people first. Then, we have to think of a way to leave this godforsaken place. It would be great if there was a seahorse at this time, Old Cunning said as he rubbed his chin. Hearing this, Yin Nuashing opened his eyes wide. You still want to save people in this situation? Are you sure you're not going to feed others? An ancient beast of the underworld king level with the bloodline of a dragon. Unless the god of the underworld king himself came to subdue it, no one could do anything to it. Seeing Yin Nuashing's expression, Old Cunning was also stunned. Then, he suddenly thought of something and said, "Little brother, you've misunderstood. We're not going to save the people who were eaten by that big guy. We're going to save other people who were kidnapped." Other people? Yin Nuashing was stunned. Mermaids. At this moment, Liao Ming stood up and walked to the two of them. He mysteriously spat out these two words with a faint smile. Of course, in layman terms, You can just call them fishmen. Sly Old Fox nodded and said, the Merfolk clan is a very large clan in the entire Eastern Sea. It can be said that the entire Eastern Sea is their residence, and we're just some outsiders. The relationship between the Merfolk and the human clan is not good. It is not wrong to say that they fight as soon as they meet. Therefore, the human clan that enters the Eastern Sea must be extra careful, lest they accidentally enter their territory. Usually, the men of the defeated human race would be captured as slaves, while the women— Liao Ming smiled and didn't continue. Yin Nuoxing tilted her head and looked at Liao Ming in confusion. She didn't know why he stopped talking. Seeing him like this, Old Cunning scratched his head and looked at Xian, the two girls, and the woman in white with some apprehension. After thinking for a while, he used a finger to draw a few circles in front of his temple and said telepathically, beast. Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing's face stiffened. As smart as he was, he understood the meaning of this action and this word. Suddenly, he felt uncomfortable. It seemed that he was sending sheep to the tiger's den by bringing the three beautiful girls to wander around the Eastern Sea. Little Star? What's wrong? Seeing Yin Nuoxing's face turn pale in an instant, Xian asked a little worriedly. She touched his forehead with her lily-white hand. Yin Nuoxing heard this and laughed dryly. Then, he shook his head and didn't say anything. How could he talk about this kind of thing? Well, the rest of the mercenaries are either dead or scattered, so there are only a few of you left. Let's not talk about this for now. Many of our Liao Tinga's experts have been captured as well. When I fell into the water, I saw those mermen catching people at lightning speed. You guys are quite capable to be able to escape this calamity. Those guys are not easy to deal with. Old Cunning stroked his chin as he looked at Yin Nuoxing with a smile. What's wrong? Yin Nuoxing asked with a dry laugh. Goosebumps appeared on his skin from this smile. Little brother, since you're so strong, why don't you come with me and help me save people? Old Cunning said with a smile. Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing rolled his eyes. As expected, this was his plan. However, he didn't really want to make a move. If he did, he would attract attention and might even expose his identity. Seeing Yin Nuoxing's expression, Liao Ming smiled and threw out a very tempting offer. Hee, brother, I'm sure you're also going to the ruins. Let's not beat around the bush. If you can help, I'll give you the map of the ruins. What do you think? As expected, Yin Nuoxing's face twitched. He was following Liao Tinga's fleet to the ruins. Originally, he had planned to go there alone if something happened. Unfortunately, he didn't have a map or coordinates. Now, Liao Ming's offer was undoubtedly what he wanted. What do you think? Liao Ming put his hands behind his back and smiled faintly, as if he wasn't afraid that Yin Nuoxing would refuse. Rubbing his thumb and index finger gently, Yin Nuoxing's face was a little dark. He didn't have to worry about going alone, but if he had to bring along a beautiful flower, it would be a little troublesome. After a long time, his rubbing fingers stopped. Yin Nuoxing sighed heavily and scratched his head. Then, he looked at Liao Ming and said softly, Okay. After getting his answer, the smile on Liao Ming's face widened. He nodded and looked at Old Cunning. Uncle, let's go then. All right. Old Cunning laughed loudly. His laughter echoed in the cave, and it sounded a little creepy. Yin Nuoxing looked at him strangely. If he didn't know that he didn't fight in front of everyone, he would have thought that his identity was exposed. Sighing, Yin Nuoxing turned around and patted Xian's head. He said with a serious face, If anything happens later, stay by my side. You must be within my sight. Don't be more than 2 meters away from me. Do you understand? Yin Nuoxing didn't feel at ease leaving Xian here alone. Of course, he had to bring her along. However, he had to remind her, in case this flower disappeared in the blink of an eye. If that happened, he would have to cry. As for what he would cry about, so, for various reasons, he had to protect her. Okay. Xian nodded solemnly. Although she didn't know what Yin Nuoxing heard that made him become so serious, she would always listen to him. Since he didn't want her to leave, then she would just follow him. Thinking of this, Xian immediately held Yin Nuoxing's hand. In the blue sea, a few huge bubbles floated past. Each bubble contained a person, but there were 2 bubbles that contained 2 or 3 people. The sunlight penetrated the sea, which wasn't too deep, and the people inside could be seen. It was Yin Nuoshing and the others. At this time, they were flying along the mountain range at the bottom of the sea. The corals and seaweed formed a primeval forest, and the anemones that stuck to the rock walls were incomparably huge. It was as if they had come to a forest on land. When they came to the edge of the mountain range, a huge trench appeared in front of them. It was pitch black at the bottom of the sea, and nothing could be seen. It was as if it led to hell, separating the two mountains. If they were on land, people who couldn't fly would definitely be blocked. However, they were in the sea, whether they could fly or not. As long as they could use their hands, they could cross. There seems to be air in the sea. After crossing this huge trench, Yin Nuoshing felt something. He poked his head out of the energy layer and felt a gust of fresh air rush into his nose. He didn't even need to breathe, and there was no water flowing in. The Eastern Sea is a sea of life. It's the largest sea in the realm of the gods. Although most of the things that live in the sea are marine products, after a human heavenly gods modification, the sea can also breathe. In other words, humans can also live in the sea. However, whether or not they can adapt to it depends on how the humans think. Old Crafty smiled and said, "In the Eastern Sea, there are many demon beasts and magical beasts. The only large-scale human settlement is the sea god's domain. Even if there are many people there, they only account for 1 in 10 million of the total life in the Eastern Sea." Liao Ming thought for a while and said, "Moreover, in the sea, there are a few largest clans: Mare People, Dragon Clan, Demon Whale Clan, Divine Turtle Clan, and so on. Among them, the Mare People clan is the largest, and the strongest clan is the Dragon Clan. However, the Dragon Clan is also divided into many clans. Moreover, they are not unified. Each clan has its own battles. After all, the Dragon Clan is the most warlike clan. The Azure Sea Palace is a subsidiary clan of the Azure Dragon Clan, which has the Azure Dragon bloodline. The Azure Dragon bloodline in their bodies is relatively thin and not as thick as the orthodox Azure Dragon bloodline." At this point, Old Cunning paused and knocked on his head. After a long while, he said, "It seems that the Azure Dragon Clan is currently the most powerful Dragon Clan." "Sigh, I'm old, I forgot." Dragon Clan. Yin Nuoshing was stunned, and then some joy flashed across his eyes. Speaking of the Dragon Clan, he thought of dragon eggs and wanted to take one back. However, he also thought of the Void Spirit Dragon's egg in the pendant. That egg might be the only one left in the realm of the gods. It used to be the king of the Dragon Clan. Although it had been taken out of the saint-grade mysterious crystal, it was still in a deep sleep. Yin Nuoshing himself could not say for sure when it would hatch. The major clans of the Dragon Clan: the Azure Dragon Clan, the Black Flood Dragon Clan, the Emerald Dragon Clan, the Dragon of Life. I can't remember too many of the rest. Most of the Dragon Clan is very low-key, and they don't have the heart to compete with the world. Therefore, many of the Dragon Clan are hidden from the world. If one day an unknown clan about the Dragon Clan pops up in the realm of the gods, it wouldn't be strange. Liao Ming rubbed his chin and said slowly, "Why do I feel like we've come to an incredible place?" Yin Nuoshing laughed dryly. There were so many clans in the sea. No matter which clan it was, they could be compared to the first-rate forces in the realm of the gods. This was the place where the magical beast world gathered. Indeed, because in the Eastern Sea, every sea area is divided by several major clans of magical beasts. We are now in the northwest part of the Eastern Sea, in the territory of the Merfolk clan. This clan is also a very ancient clan. There were rumors about them in the primordial age. At that time, they were already a big clan. After so many years, they must have become a transcendent clan. Moreover, the reason why the Merfolk clan is so powerful is not only because of their own relationship, but also because they are somewhat related to those ancient giant beasts in the deep sea. It's said that they share a symbiotic relationship with the Merfolk clan. When Old Cunning said this, his expression became serious. Those ancient giant beasts were the overlords of the sea that had survived for countless years. Even if the Dragon Clan were to fight against them, they could not say for sure that they would win. They both had ancient bloodlines, so it was really hard to say who was stronger. For example, that big octopus? Yin Nuoxing laughed dryly. Yes. Old Cunning and Liao Ming both nodded at the same time. There was a faint trace of fear in their eyes. It seemed that what happened today had really left a deep impression on them. As the few of them were chatting, they reached the end of the flatbed at the bottom of the sea. The terrain suddenly dropped a few hundred meters, and they were already close to the territory of the deep sea. However, there was still light in front of them. At the bottom of the cliff, there seemed to be something emitting a bright light. We're here. This is the place where the Merfo clan was stationed, the closest to where our fleet was destroyed. Old Cunning stopped at a place near the cliff. He waved his hand for everyone to stop as well. Then he slowly squatted down, looked at the bright area in front of him, and took a deep breath. Chapter 379. Below the cliff was a rocky campsite on the seabed. Scattered starfish were stuck to the rock walls, and huge, colorful seaweed swayed like banners. The huge seaweed swayed outside the campsite with the current and wrapped tightly around the campsite. Schools of small fish darted through the seaweed and frolicked. Every now and then, 4 or 5 rays would cross the sky, and the frightened fish would immediately flee into the forest and disappear. Dozens of irregular natural stone pillars stood in the campsite. Square pavilions were built on the wide stones. On the stone platform, mother-of-pearl shells several meters wide opened and closed gently, spitting out a large ball of bubbles. Huge pearls were either inlaid or placed randomly in every corner of the stone platform. The light they emitted made it seem like it was daytime. It's so beautiful. It was the first time she saw the undersea forest. Xian's Maymao shone with a strange light. She was a little dazed, and Yin Nuoxing couldn't help but take a few more glances. For a moment, she was stunned and muttered, "It's quite beautiful." When Zai saw this scene, he suddenly whispered softly, "You're standing in front of the cliff looking at the scenery, and the person looking at the scenery is looking at you from the side. Look over there." Yuan Shi, who had been paying attention to the bottom, didn't notice the 2 people who were stunned. His eyes suddenly saw something, and his pupils shrank slightly. He quickly tugged on Yin Nuoxing's clothes and pointed down. When they heard this sound, the 2 people were stunned for a second. When they came back to their senses, they turned and looked in the direction Yuan Shi was pointing. Then, Yin Nuoxing frowned slightly. On the giant stone platform, other than the 5-meter square pavilions, there was also something that looked like a cage. Inside the cage were pearls that were larger than a person. Of course, what made Yin Nuoxing's expression serious was not the pearls, but the fact that there was a person inside the pearls. Moreover, judging from their clothes, they were the people who were kidnapped by Liao Tiange. Looking at them, they seemed to have fainted, and there were still weak signs of life. Around the square pavilions and the giant stone platform, there was a group of creatures with human bodies and fish tails swimming quickly. They had long, pointed ears, and their arms were covered in scales. They were bigger than humans, and their bodies and fish tails were more than 10 feet long. Apart from these, they were really no different from humans. Don't be fooled by their appearance. Once something happens, their performance will exceed your expectations. If mermaids insist on being classified, they should belong to the Demon Clan. Their combat power is generally higher than humans of the same level. Moreover, the water is their main battlefield. Little brother, you have to hold on to the person in front of you. If this girl is taken away, her life will be over. Old Cunning nudged Yin Nuoxing with his elbow and whispered to her through telepathy. Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing's smile instantly froze. However, before she brought Xian out, she already knew that she would not let anything happen to her. Therefore, she only froze for a moment before returning to normal. Then, she whispered, "Don't worry." While they were talking, a red shadow flew across the campsite and stopped on the largest stone platform. Then it put down the person in its hands and stood aside. If one looked closely, one would find that the purple gold robe on this middle-aged man had been torn in many places. One could vaguely see the unique mark of Liao Tiange. The exposed skin was full of wounds. Obviously, this person was also a powerhouse of Liao Tinga. Moreover, looking at his luxurious clothes, it was obvious that his status was not low. However, this person seemed to have been tortured severely. There were 6 or 7 mermen standing on the stone platform. One of them had white hair and a beard, and there were 2 curved spikes on his shoulders. He had a long brown fishtail that looked like a bow, and his wrinkled old face was expressionless. Only when a merman left the man behind did he slowly open his eyes. His sharp gaze seemed to be able to pierce through one's soul, causing one to involuntarily shiver. Humans, you have invaded our territory many times, disturbed our peace, and hunted our people. The old merman took a deep breath. His sharp gaze swept past the middle-aged man inch by inch. He said, "But this time, you even kidnapped the pearl of our clan. You all deserve to die." The ones who said this were the 6 people standing beside the old merman. Their vicious eyes made one shiver. The powerhouse of Liao Tiange, who was lying on the stone platform, heard this and trembled all over. He supported himself up with his hands with difficulty and raised his head, revealing a face full of scars. His eyes were filled with confusion. He said, "We were just passing by. We did not disturb your peace." In Liao Tiange's map, this sea region was just a place they were passing by. They had no intention of stopping. What they said definitely had nothing to do with Liao Tiange. Nonsense. When the old man heard this, he raised his eyebrows. His sharp voice made the man tremble. 3 months ago, the human race invaded the palace of my race. They disrupted the lives of my people and destroyed my home. After that, we discovered that the princess of my race had disappeared from the palace. Apart from you humans, who else would be so vicious? Hand over the princess. We can even let you die a quick death. Otherwise, you and your people will never have peace. The 6 people beside the old merman shouted in unison. Their majestic aura stirred up the nearby water. The man was suppressed by the aura and pressed his face against the stone platform again. His entire body was stuck to the stone platform like a flattened shrimp. He even sank a little. Under such pressure, his bones creaked. However, the man clenched his teeth and did not make a single sound. The pearl of the mermaid race has gone missing. No wonder it said that entering the Eastern Sea is very dangerous. So this is the reason. After hearing their conversation from afar, Old Cunning touched his chin and turned his head. When he saw Yin Nuoxing's puzzled expression, he explained, "The mermaid race's reproductive ability is not as strong as the human race. However, due to their large population, there won't be a shortage of people. However, the bloodline of the royal family seems to be a little lacking. Moreover, this is the pearl of the race. This time, the entire Eastern Sea will probably not have peace." Royal family? Yin Nuoxing was stunned when she heard this. Could there be a royal family? Not the same race. Although the mermaids are said to be one race, there are also subraces. Those whose bloodline has been passed down since ancient times and has not appeared until now are the royal family. This is the royal family's territory. Those in other areas are the royal family. Compared to the royal family, their bloodline is slightly thinner. This is because the waters in the northwest are the purest and the underwater terrain is very suitable for the mermaids to live in. Therefore, the royal family chose to take root here, Old Cunning said. They actually passed by such a dangerous place. Yin Nuoxing gasped when she heard this. A magical beast or a demon's royal family was comparable to a first-rate force in the realm of the gods. She did not expect them to sneak past this territory just now. Don't be so afraid. Although Nirvana City is a city that lands on the Eastern Sea, many routes do not directly pass through the royal family's territory. This is because Nirvana City is in the south while the mermaid's territory is in the north and east of Nirvana City. As long as you don't deliberately go there, you won't invade their territory, Old Cunning said. Yin Nuoxing heaved a sigh of relief when she heard this. However, she was still a little worried. After all, since there is a royal family's camp here, it should not be too far away from the royal family's territory. Let's talk about this later. The captain can't hold on any longer. With his strength, that has just stepped into the elementary god level, he can't withstand the pressure of a godly underworld expert. At this moment, Liao Ming suddenly spoke. He then looked at Old Cunning and said, "Uncle, think of a way to lure that godly underworld expert away. I will go with this brother to save them." Old Cunning laughed bitterly when he heard this and said, "Tomorrow, there's still 6 godly emperors there. Sai, are you asking me, this old bag of bones, to send my head to them? Just lure them away. Run as fast as you can. No one should be able to stop you, uncle." Liao Ming scratched his head and laughed inexplicably. Hearing this inexplicable voice, Yun Nuoxing turned her head strangely. She saw Old Cunning's mocking smile and thought of his title. After thinking for a while, she understood something. She then said strangely, "God of Escape? Go to hell." Old Cunning was instantly unhappy when he heard this. He slapped Yun Nuoxing's head and growled, "This is a life-saving technique. Isn't he just good at escaping? What's there to say?" Yun Nuoxing touched her head and muttered, feeling wronged, "Let's go. The captain will die in a while. A godly king isn't that easy to cultivate." However, Old Cunning didn't refuse. After all, he was the only god present. If he didn't do it, Yun Nuoxing would have to do it. In that case, these mere people would cry. Once the Netherworld sword was used, those who weren't emperors of the underworld or godly emperors wouldn't be able to block it. Ahem! Old Sly coughed heavily and stretched his body. Then, under the astonished gazes of the few people from Yunua planet, he suddenly jumped out. His figure turned into an arrow and charged towards the camp. With a single thought, a majestic energy erupted from his body, causing the surrounding seawater to be swept up into a turbulent current. The mere people in the campsite sensed the sudden energy and raised their heads in surprise. They saw a dazzling meteor wrapped in energy streaking across the campsite and stopping in front of the largest stone platform. Boom! When Old Cunning stepped onto the stone platform, a few powerful auras suddenly burst forth and swept out like a storm. The expressions of the experts in the campsite changed abruptly, and they hurriedly retreated. The terrifying pressure formed by 6 godly emperors and 1 godly underworld expert pressed down on Old Cunning like Mount Tai. Feeling this terrifying pressure from afar, Yun Nuoxing hurriedly took out the Netherworld sword. He still couldn't resist the pressure of a godly underworld expert. "You little fishes without legs, your grandfather is here. Why aren't you coming over to greet him?" Old Cunning laughed loudly. His vast aura was like a giant dragon, and it resisted the powerful pressure formed by the 7 people. In comparison, he was still a little stronger than the godly underworld expert. Although there were a few godly emperors helping him, it wasn't an obstacle. Human, seeing Old Cunning's unbridled manner, the old man immediately narrowed his eyes. His slender fingers slightly clenched into a fist. Just as he was about to shout out coldly, he was interrupted by Old Cunning's loud laughter. "Stinky legless snakes, you really are a bunch of brainless fellows. If it wasn't for the fact that your princess is pretty, you would have been destroyed long ago." Old Cunning laughed loudly. At this moment, he looked a little like an old hooligan, which made Yun Nuoxing and the others speechless. Looking at his boastful look, they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. While Old Cunning was making trouble, Yun Nuoxing left the Netherworld sword to Xian and swam down alone. The Linghong sword appeared in his hand, and a rich spatial energy spread out and wrapped around him. He had to go and save the princess now. It was more convenient for him to do this alone. Liao Ming saw him go down alone and was stunned. He wanted to follow him, but was stopped by Yuan Shi. The latter shook his head and said, "It's more convenient for him to do this alone. If we go, we'll be in the way." Hearing this, Liao Ming laughed bitterly. However, seeing that he didn't seem to be joking, he was relieved. Her Highness the Princess is in your hands." Hearing Old Cunning mention the merfolk's pearl, the old man immediately raised his head. The lazy look on his face disappeared and was replaced by shock and anger. One could even feel a murderous aura. Old Cunning laughed loudly. As soon as he finished laughing, he slowly raised his hand and gently clenched it at them. Twist! As the word Old Crafty Fox was spat out from his mouth, Yin Nuoxing saw the seawater within a radius of 10,000 feet suddenly boil. A light blue wolf head surfaced from his body, after which a silver-blue energy storm suddenly formed and swept towards the campsite. Boom! The energy storm, which was 10,000 feet in size, gently crashed into the campsite. The seabed platform suddenly shook violently, as if there was an earthquake. Huge cracks spread from the bottom of the abyss to the top and finally extended into the distance. Defend! The old man and the others frowned deeply in the face of the storm that tore through space. They worked together, and a strange ripple spread out from their bodies. After that, it swiftly spread to the center of the storm, and even the seawater in the region began to move. After this ripple spread, Yin Nuoxing and the rest saw that the enormous energy storm seemed to have met with some kind of resistance as it slowed down. Even the area of the storm became smaller, after which, in a few breaths' time, it was forcefully reversed and finally disappeared. Hey, rumor has it that the stinky snake can borrow the energy of the sea. It's just as I expected. Old Cunning was not surprised to see that his attack, which was aided by the beast's soul, was easily repelled. He glanced at the devastated campsite, and then at Pearl, who was in the campsite, and no one was there. Only then did he relax. He looked left and right a few times, and then picked up the corporal. Taking advantage of the fact that the mermaids had not completely retracted their energy, he flashed and instantly disappeared. Humans, destroy! The old man and the others heaved a sigh of relief after dealing with the energy storm. When he turned around and wanted to say something, he realized that Old Cunning had disappeared. Even the captain was nowhere to be seen. The old man's eyes widened. The divine emperors looked at each other, not knowing what had happened in such a short time. Find them. Go and find them. They can't have gone far. Catch them, dead or alive. Chapter 380. When this furious voice was heard, Yin Nuoxing and the others had already carried a dozen people back. Old Sly was worried that they would be caught, so he fled at full speed with the others. His speed was not much slower than Yin Nuoxing when he urged the light element, which made him dumbfounded. They made many turns and flew over the mountain range at the bottom of the sea. Along the way, Yin Nuoxing used the Netherworld Ruins sword to erase the aura they left behind so that no one could follow them. After flying like this for half an hour, everyone finally returned to the cave where they were hiding. Seeing that a large hole had suddenly opened up in the rock wall, Yin Nuoxing and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Although it seemed easy to save people just now, he felt that it was similar to being a thief, sneaky and sneaky. There were only a dozen or so experts rescued from Liao Tinga. They could not find anyone else in this camp. Their strength was not very high, between the demon level and the demigod level. Other than the captain, who had just stepped into the demigod level, it was no wonder that they did not have the ability to escape on their own. If they were caught by the group of mermaids, they could only stretch out their necks and wait to be killed. After returning to the temporary camp, they settled these people down. The rescued people were still alive, but they had fainted. After a careful examination, the group was really relieved. As for the missing people, they would probably be missing forever. Brother Yun. After resting for a while, Liao Ming pulled Yin Nuoxing to the side and smiled inexplicably. His hand slipped from his sleeve and took out a sheepskin scroll. He gently rubbed his fingers twice, then put it in Yin Nuoxing's hand. He smiled and said, "This is the location of the relic." Yin Nuoxing heard this and raised his eyebrows. He opened the sheepskin scroll and saw a complete EC plate. Compared to his treasure map, there were many more islands and settlements. There was also the area of the sea god's domain. In the upper right corner, there was a sign of palace. This should be Liao Tinga's destination, the relic. Yin Nuoxing looked at the map over and over again, then stared at the palace and asked, "What exactly is this relic?" "We don't know either." Liao Ming shook his head and said, "These ruins weren't discovered by us, Liao Tinga. It should be said that it was discovered by the human forces of the Eastern Sea a long time ago. As for who it was, they didn't mention it. We're just a small team among the millions of exploration teams." If I'm not wrong, that ruin should belong to the Merfolk clan. It might also belong to the Dragon clan. However, it said that no one from the human race or the two clans has entered it. The level of danger there is comparable to a forbidden zone. Those who enter never return, Liao Ming said with a grave expression. But no matter what, it's still a relic from the primordial era. No, it can't be called a relic. It's an ancient city, a city that has already been destroyed. A city from the primordial era. Yin Nuoxing heard this, and his eyelids twitched. At this moment, he thought of the rain country from the mythological era. He didn't know why it sank to the bottom of the water, and it sank so far away. It's not the first time we, Liao Tinga, have gone to explore it. However, this is the first time we've sent out a large team. I didn't expect. Sigh, we didn't get off to a good start. Liao Ming sighed heavily and shook his head helplessly. Yin Nuoxing shrugged. This kind of thing wasn't rare. Outside the Forbidden Zone, a group of people went there with curiosity or greed, but in the end, the nest was overturned and no eggs were left intact. It could only be said that Liao Tinga's operation, this time, was only a small part of the overall situation. Yin Nuoxing carefully rolled up the sheepskin scroll and looked at Liao Ming and asked, "Do we just head east from here?" "Yes." Liao Ming nodded and said, "We are now near the endless ocean abyss. It's the darkest place on the map. The ancient city is to the right of here. However, without a boat, it would take a few months to walk or swim across the sea. Moreover, the bottom of the sea is very dangerous. Not to mention the environment of the sea, just the races there are enough to give anyone below the God King realm a headache." "A boat." Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing smiled. He didn't lack a boat. Moreover, his true strength wasn't only at the God King realm. It didn't matter if they were mermaids or dragons. As long as they didn't provoke them, everything would be fine. It would be fine. "What about you guys?" Yin Nuoxing asked curiously. "We?" Liao Ming paused. Then, he frowned and pouted as if he had thought of a tragic situation. After a long while, he smiled bitterly and said, "We can only stay here and wait for everyone to wake up before we head to the sea god's domain. We can go back now. Instead of taking a detour back to Nirvana City, we might as well go straight to the sea god's domain. However, both methods are equally dangerous. All right." Yin Nuoxing spread his hands. After all, Liao Tinga's fleet was destroyed, and he had taken the core. Moreover, he didn't plan to bring them along. To some extent, having one more person would be more troublesome. Seeing that Yin Nuoxing wasn't worried at all, Liao Ming pursed his lips. He knew that Yin Nuoxing had some tricks up his sleeve since he was acting so mysterious. However, he still reminded him out of habit. "Brother Yin, you have to be careful. The bottom of the sea is very dangerous. It's far from being as peaceful as it seems." "Don't worry." Yin Nuoxing smiled. If fate wills it, we'll meet again in the sea god's domain. I wish you all the best, Brother Yuan." Following Yin Nuoxing slowly back to Xian's side, Liao Ming cupped his hands and smiled. In the end, he glanced at Xian suspiciously before looking away. Yin Nuoxing returned a smile. He didn't explain anything to Liao Ming when he saw Liao Ming's suspicious gaze. He was afraid that Liao Ming wouldn't be able to take the shock and go crazy. Seeing that Old Sly and the others were busy, Yin Nuoxing didn't want to disturb them. He could only nod at Liao Ming before leading Xian and the others into the water. "Little Star, what were you talking about just now?" After they came out of the cave, Xian, who rarely spoke in front of others, finally spoke. She held Yin Nuoxing's arm and asked, "We were looking into the ruins and the situation at the bottom of the sea," Yin Nuoxing said. He turned around and looked at the rock wall that was covered by corals and the big cave. He moved and led everyone to the surface of the sea. According to Liao Ming and the others, if possible, it was best not to travel at the bottom of the sea. Yin Nuoxing stroked the pendant in front of his chest and took out the ship made of mysterious dragon silver that he hadn't seen in a long time. He enlarged it to a size of 1,000 feet and led the others to land on it. He looked at the calm surface of the sea and sat down. Then he took out the map that he had just obtained from Liao Ming and spread out the treasure map. He folded it a few times, and only the EC was shown on the map. Now, let's move the things on this map to this world map. Yin Nuoxing clapped his hands and smiled when he saw Zian and the others' puzzled gazes. Brother, can't we just use this map? Little Purple Soul asked hurriedly when he saw a map the size of a wash basin and a large map that was dozens of meters long. Of course. Yin Nuoxing smiled, and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Comparing a large map to a small map was very tiring. It was best not to do it. No. However, when he said that, the others who heaved a sigh of relief almost gave him the middle finger. Nuoxing, why do you have to mark it? Can't we just use this map? However, Yuanshi didn't know why Yin Nuoxing did that. Yin Nuoxing was stunned. He suddenly remembered that he didn't tell Yuanshi about this map and explained it to him. As expected, Yuanshi's jaw dropped when he heard that. It was the first time he saw a map that could be used to locate their location at any time. He finally understood why the location was marked on the map. After all, only this treasure map could guide them in the right direction. There weren't many clear landmarks in the vast East Sea. It was very helpful to have something that could be used to locate their location. However, it was easier said than done. It took the 6 people and 1 beast half a day to complete the 2 maps that were disproportionate in size. That was because the 2 girls were slacking off in the middle of the process. Yin Nuoxing nodded in satisfaction when she saw the marked map of the EC. She glanced at their location from the red dot all the way to the palace at the top right corner. After identifying the direction, she turned the boat around and shrank it. Then, she slowly sailed towards that area. Unknowingly, night had enveloped the entire East Sea. The pale blue moonlight shone down from the sky. The few people sitting on the long Xian silver, surrounded by Ling Hongjian, opened their eyes one after another. They looked at the huge crescent moon at the bow of the boat with a sense of tranquility in their eyes. The silver boat gently parted the waves. Without a sail, it was as if they were drifting on the sea. If it wasn't for the fact that the red dot on the map was approaching the palace, Yin Nuoxing would have thought that they weren't moving forward. Sure enough, the starry sky seen from the sea is the most beautiful. Yin Nuoxing looked at the bright moon and the surrounding stars in the sky. She couldn't help but murmur softly. The starry sky she saw in the small sea region of Sea Monarch City was actually a little similar to this place. However, she subconsciously felt that it was more beautiful here. The boat sailed gently under the moonlight. Occasionally, they would pass by 1 or 2 underwater mountains that were exposed above the water surface. On the platforms above the water surface, there were lonely sentry towers. Under the icy blue moonlight, they looked a little lonely and desolate. It seemed that they were built by the human race and had been abandoned for a long time. The monotonous, icy blue sea was empty and lifeless. Deep into the night, even the schools of fish had fallen asleep. There were no fish escorting them, only a lonely little boat drifting on the surface of the sea. Looking at the 2 girls sleeping in front of the boat and the 2 figures standing at the bow of the boat, Yuanshi sighed. Their long purple hair swayed gently with the sea breeze. The moonlight seemed to have covered them with gauze, making them look like an immortal couple. At this moment, he suddenly missed Yu Xiao very much. He also wanted someone to accompany him to enjoy this beautiful night view. There seemed to be a burst of light music coming from afar. It seemed to be coming from the horizon. The lingering sound lingered in the ears with a hint of charm. However, it was filtered by Ling Hongjian's barrier and did not affect the people on the boat. Yin Nuoxing and the others were also a little more vigilant after hearing this music. This was because this was the singing of the mermaids and would attract passing boats. However, with Ling Hongjian around, they could also enjoy this beautiful music in peace. The moonlight was pleasant and the singing was mellow. It tempted people and made them fall asleep early. Even Yin Nuoxing and the others unknowingly lay down on the boat while listening to the music. Chapter 381. The young man woke up with a startled cry in the morning. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and raised his head to look at the blue sky. He was stunned for a moment before he gently placed the girl in his arms to the side. He got up and walked to the edge of the boat. He looked at the calm sea surface and frowned slightly. He smelled something unusual. "Big brother?" A young girl's voice came from behind him. The young man turned around and looked at the little girl standing in front of him. He smiled and picked her up. He patted her head and looked at the sea surface with a frown. The young man in white, who was leaning on the other side of the boat, also woke up. He stretched and turned his head. When he saw the serious look on the young man's face, he couldn't help but be stunned. He asked, "What's wrong? Why do you have such a serious expression?" "It's a little strange. Also, I think I've smelled it somewhere before." Yin Nuashing wrinkled her nose and said, "Strange smell." Yuanshi was stunned. He also sniffed. However, he didn't smell anything strange for a long time. However, looking at Yin Nuashing's appearance, it didn't seem fake. Xian, who had already woken up, got up a little reluctantly after hearing these muttering words. Mei Mao looked at the two of them with a little resentment. Her small mouth also pouted, as if she was blaming them for waking her up. Xian casually tidied up her messy hair and stood up lazily. When she saw Yin Nuashing in a daze, the corners of her mouth curved into a beautiful arc. She walked over lightly and hugged him from behind. Her jade hands circled around his waist, and her pretty face was buried in his shoulder. "You're awake?" Seeing this action, Yin Nuashing and Yin Nuashing were stunned. Yin Nuashing had done this many times and was used to it. On the other hand, Yuanshi clutched his chest and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. "I've received tons of damage." Yuanshi's face was pale, and his eyes were filled with horror, as if he had seen a ghost. He almost jumped into the sea. Yin Nuashing slapped him and patted the little hand on her stomach. "Girl, your observation skills are better than mine. Help me see if there's anything wrong here." Hearing this, Xian wrinkled her nose and slowly took off her clothes. She looked at Mei Mao and scanned the surroundings. She even used Yin Nuashing's evil spirit eye, but she couldn't find anything wrong. "Can't you just look at the map?" Suddenly, Xian turned around and tilted her head to look at Yin Nuashing. She said doubtfully, "If you think it's strange, it's just that you went to the wrong place. However, the entire EC is quite strange. Everything is strange. It's just a matter of degree." Yin Nuashing stared blankly. After a while, he laughed awkwardly and took out the treasure map. Seeing him like this, Xian held her forehead helplessly. It seemed that little star was very confused when he woke up. After looking at the map for a long time, Yin Nuashing finally found the little red dot. At this time, his gaze was fixed on the northwest part of the EC plate. His mind was also frozen at this moment. "What the F***CK?" When he came back to his senses, Yin Nuashing almost threw the map away. Xian and Yuanshi, who were the first to react, were shocked. They hurriedly rushed forward and glanced at the map. Then they suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. We only slept for one night. How do we drift to this place?" There was no problem with the last confirmation of the course. Yuanshi grabbed the map in disbelief. He looked up and down, but he still saw the red dot flashing in the northwest part of the EC plate. F***CK. We've entered the royal family's territory. Yin Nuashing laughed ferociously, scaring little purple soul. Their current location was exactly what Old Cunning had told them, the royal territory of the merfolk, and it was also a place that everyone avoided like snakes and scorpions. Who would have thought that they would accidentally stumble into this place? No wonder. That smell, it's the smell of seafood. Yin Nuashing laughed dryly and finished his sentence. To be able to smell the stench of fish on the surface of the sea. How many mermen lived in the sea below? I think we should hurry up and leave. Yuanshi shuddered and quickly turned the boat around. However, before Yin Nuashing could release the light element, they realized that there were suddenly many black figures flying in the sea beside Long Xianin. A cold aura was quietly spreading. Splash! The slender fish tail gently floated to the surface of the water before it quickly slapped back into the water. Those shadows were at least 10 feet long. Some of them were burly, while others were slender. Hundreds and thousands of shadows circled around the mysterious dragon silver ship, constantly circling it. Looking at those slender, fish-like shadows, Yin Nuoxing wiped her forehead and laughed dryly. We're really here to deliver food this time. Tell me, do you think I look better, or do you look fresher? Yuanxi's throat rolled as she murmured, I don't know. I've never eaten myself before. Yin Nuoxing answered seriously. The colorful pattern on her arm flashed, and the Linghong sword appeared in her left hand. She held the Nether Void sword tightly in her other hand. As soon as the two divine swords appeared, Yin Nuoxing did not activate them. Two terrifying waves of energy spread out. The surrounding space and time became chaotic. One could even see the space rippling like water. The Nether Void sword and the Linghong sword resonated in this tense atmosphere. Waves of energy spread out from the two swords, causing Yuanxi to feel fear from the bottom of his heart. This was the first time he felt the pressure of a divine weapon at such a close distance. As soon as the two waves of energy came out, the shadows in the water seemed to be under great pressure. They all stopped moving. Then, they twisted their slender bodies and gathered at the south side of the boat. Although they did not move, they did not do anything either. The two sides seemed to be in a stalemate. Yin Nuoxing took a deep breath and placed the Linghong sword in Xian's hand. She held the Nether Void sword with both hands. If they were to fight later, she had to protect the flower behind her. Since she was alone, she was obviously distracted. At this time, she could only rely on the divine weapon, the Linghong sword. If she defended with all her strength, no one would be able to do anything to her, unless an expert from the Emperor of the Underworld came. With a thought, the divine weapons emerged from her body and surrounded the few of them. Yuanxi quickly grabbed two of them. Just as Yin Nuoxing and Xian were preparing, the group of black shadows gradually moved. A black shadow slowly floated to the surface of the water. Behind him, the mermen clustered around this black shadow and floated to the surface of the water. Following the splashing sound of water, Yin Nuoxing saw many heads emerge from the water. A middle-aged merman who looked to be in his 30s or 40s floated to the surface of the water. His long fishtail was buried under the water. He was different from the merman that Yin Nuoxing saw previously. The merman that he saw previously had a much slender fishtail that was more like a snake's tail. However, this merman's fishtail was much thicker and was no different from a real fish. Even his ears were like two fans that were gently moving. As soon as these gazes appeared, Yin Nuoxing sensitively sensed that 90% of the strange gazes fell behind him. This made him speechless. He took a step to the side and hid Xian behind him. The middle-aged merman floated to the surface of the water and stared straight at Yin Nuoxing and the others. His fish eyes widened and then narrowed. After a long time, he said in a deep voice, "Humans, it has been many years since a human stepped into our territory. But now, you have invaded again and again." What surprised Yin Nuoxing was that this merman could speak the human language. However, after thinking about it, it was understandable. If the two races wanted to interact, they would have to overcome the language barrier. Moreover, although this merman did not look very old, Yin Nuoxing could sense that he was an old monster. It was not surprising that he knew the human language. Yin Nuoxing pursed his lips and said, "You won't believe me if I say that I walked in by accident, right?" "Ha! You don't have to say that. Whether it was intentional or not, it is an indisputable fact that you have come in." The middle-aged man stroked his chin and smiled. They were the guards of the royal family's border. They had to protect the territory from other races. Yin Nuoxing had accidentally walked in. Normally, they would just chase him away. However, due to some things that happened some time ago, perhaps the way to deal with him would have to be changed. Looking at the murderous aura that permeated the surface of the water, it was clear that it was easy to enter, but not easy to leave. "Young people, do you intend to bind your hands and feet and apologize to us, the prophet, or—" The middle-aged man licked his lips and smiled sinisterly. "I don't really like to play with bondage." Yin Nuoxing rolled his eyes and said. The middle-aged man nodded. Killing intent surged in his eyes, and he said, "Then we will have to do it ourselves." Yin Nuoxing smiled and looked at the calm surface of the water. He looked left and right for a long time, blinked his eyes, and put away the divine artifacts, leaving only the Nether Void sword and Ling Hong's sword in his hands. He said with a smile, "But I don't really want to go. Moreover, you can't catch me." The middle-aged man's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the pile of divine artifacts enter Yin Nuoxing's body. He looked at him in confusion, and when he heard what he said, he was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed loudly. His sharp laughter caused the former to tremble and have goosebumps. "Ha! Young people are indeed arrogant by nature. This old man really wants to see how you will escape from our hands today." The middle-aged man laughed towards the sky, not taking Yin Nuoxing seriously at all. After all, he was a Shunming expert, so he could naturally see that Yin Nuoxing was merely a celestial-level cultivator. To him, Yin Nuoxing was merely an ant. He could crush Yin Nuoxing to death with a stretch of his hand. Yuan Shi and the others shrugged indifferently when they heard the middle-aged man's laughter. Then, they let out a long yawn. They were naturally not worried about being caught. Yin Nuoxing had always been using the light to torture them. No one in the world could catch him. Since he did not attack randomly from the beginning, then there was a chance for them to escape. Provoking the Merfolk clan was not something that Yin Nuoxing was willing to do. He was still wary of this overlord of the Eastern Sea. Although he did not want to provoke them, it did not mean that he could be manipulated by others. Even the Emperor of the Underworld could not do anything to him. This small Shunming wanted to capture him? What a joke. Yin Nuoxing would definitely not agree to it. Once he was in their territory, no matter what he did, it would not bode well for him. How could he do something like throwing himself to death? Being stared at by Yin Nuoxing's playful gaze, the smile on the middle-aged man's face gradually turned gloomy. His shriveled hand bent slightly, and strands of azure blue energy drilled out. Finally, like a long whip, they coiled around his fingers. This old man really doesn't believe that you can escape from my hands today. Killing intent flowed out from his eyes. The middle-aged man's figure suddenly swayed, and he disappeared from his original spot. The merfolk underwater did not move, and only quietly floated in the water. Yin Nuoxing's eyes twitched when he saw the middle-aged man disappear. He clenched his fist, raised the Netherworld ruined sword above his head, and swung it towards the space in front of him without any fancy movements. The middle-aged man glanced at the huge sword that was swinging towards him, and a cold cry rang out from his mouth. His shriveled hand was wrapped in a thin layer of azure blue energy, and he directly slammed it towards the Netherworld ruined sword. Yin Nuoxing's face twitched when he saw the middle-aged man's actions. He said nothing, and just quietly watched the palm and the huge sword collide. Boom! The huge sword and the palm paused for an instant when they came into contact. Then, the middle-aged man's body violently trembled, and he was sent flying in an arc through the air by a violent wave of air. He staggered back a few hundred meters before barely stabilizing himself. The sudden scene caused the gazes of the merfolk to freeze, especially when they saw that even the middle-aged man could not withstand the clash of swords. A wave of uncontrollable shock surged out from their hearts. Stabilizing his body, the middle-aged man quickly raised his head. Shock also surged onto his face that was invaded by killing intent. His eyes stared intently at the huge sword that was being carefully wiped by Yin Nuoxing as he said in a deep voice, "Divine artifact?" Yin Nuoxing smiled, but did not say anything. He had already done his best to control the power of the Netherworld ruined sword. Otherwise, not even a speck of dust would be left of the fish. Everyone from the merfolk race, if you don't want to fight, you don't have to send us off. We will come again next time when we are free. Yin Nuoxing laughed heartily. The light element burst forth from his body, and then it was continuously channeled into the dragon Xian silver, turning the entire ship of brilliant gold. Light element. Seeing the light that was as dazzling as the sun, the middle-aged man was so shocked that his jaw dropped. Who would have thought that this strange-looking young man could actually control the most terrifying element? Yin Nuoxing laughed heartily. With a thought, the Ling Hong sword floated to his hand, and the boundary that separated the space was activated. Then, The light element was released violently, and it turned into a ray of light that was 100 feet in size. It charged out violently, and it created a tsunami that was 1,000 feet in size behind it, before it disappeared into the horizon. Light! The middle-aged man wanted to say something, but he was slapped into the water by the overwhelming wave. He only managed to say one word, and when he surfaced from the water again, there were already no figures of the merfolk. Forget it. We'd better not provoke people who possess the light element. Let's just pretend that we didn't see this. Also, remember not to spread this news to the prophet. The middle-aged man smiled bitterly as he spoke to the shocked merman behind him in the merman language. Yes, the merfolk laughed bitterly, and then dove into the water with the middle-aged man. Chapter 382. At the end of the horizon, a bright golden light suddenly flashed. Within a few seconds, it swept across the surface of the sea, stirring up waves, and then disappeared from sight. After a long time, the color of the light gradually dimmed a little, and even its speed slowed down. It seemed that after experiencing the previous failure of driving, Yin Nuoxing was now deliberately slowing down. He did not stop all of a sudden to avoid crashing again. However, no matter how hard he tried to slow down, he still sprinted on the surface of the water for a few million miles before coming to a stop. When Long Xian completely stopped on the surface of the sea, Yin Nuoxing heaved a sigh of relief. He turned around to see that Xian and the others did not show any symptoms of dizziness or other discomfort. He grinned and said, "Quick, praise me. It's rare for you to be able to stop the speed of light." Yuanshi rolled his eyes, then looked at Yin Nuoxing's long hair, which was half white, and said, "You can maintain the speed of light now." "Not yet. The speed of light only reached an instant, and it's already like this. I guess that to maintain the speed of light for a long time, one has to at least be a demigod." Yin Nuoxing shook his head, grabbed a handful of his hair, and shook it with a smile. Little Star can finally slow down. In the past, he was always playing with collisions. Xian patted his head and smiled. Yin Nuoxing pursed his lips and looked at her pitifully. Xian pursed her lips and smiled, then patted his head. What's the next step? Seeing that the two of them were acting as if there was no one else around, Yuanshi coughed dryly and asked. Hearing that, Yin Nuoxing took out the treasure map, looked at the direction, then sighed. Just now, he used the light element to escape to the south, but he did not expect that he only moved a little on the map. However, he just happened to leave the territory of the merfolk royal family. If he headed east from here, along the border, he estimated that he would reach the ruins in a little more than a month. Just keep heading east. You'll reach the ruins in less than 2 months, Yin Nuoxing said after putting down the treasure map. However, is there really something in the ruins? I heard you guys talking about it. It's a dangerous place comparable to a forbidden zone, right? Yuanshi said as he turned the boat around. I don't know, but there's no doubt that there's something in a dangerous place. Yin Nuoxing shook her head. There was the soul-devouring tree in the ghastly forest, the heart of the earth in the earth grotto, and its true form was that of a demonic beast. There was the shadow of Tao Tai and the pillar of creation in the Tana's water god temple. Fun Yinshan spat out the scarlet cross. Who knew what was inside these ruins that were comparable to the forbidden zone of life? Danger and opportunity coexisted, so it was called a crisis. Perhaps this was also the thought of many people. It was also because of this that they walked towards dangerous places without hesitation, knowing that those places might be a place of no return. However, the East Sea also has the existence of the divine flame. I have to go and take a look. Yin Nuoxing shook the treasure map and suddenly sighed. Where? Xian and the other two were stunned when they heard this. They hurriedly came up and asked. She pointed to a place slightly southeast of the red dot and said, Here, this swaying blue flame with a hint of red. If I'm not mistaken, it should be the sea prison flame that's ranked 66th. 66th, it's already past half of the ranking. Yuanshi nodded. Then his gaze paused and his face trembled. He laughed dryly and said, But I feel that it's quite dangerous there. What? Yin Nuashing was stunned. After thinking for a while, she nodded in agreement and said, "Of course it's dangerous. How can a place where the divine flame is born not be dangerous?" I'm not talking about this, but Yuanshi shook his head and pointed to the flame. Then he drew a circle around it and said, "Look at this area." Yin Nuashing looked at it suspiciously. Then she raised her head strangely and looked at him in confusion. "This area is the deep sea. Little Star is so stupid." Seeing that he was still in a daze, Xian finally couldn't help but roll her eyes at him and said, Yin Nuashing was stunned. Then she came back to her senses and saw that the area was like a drop of ink on a piece of paper. It was so dark that it was frightening. Even the endless sea abyss that Old Sly had led them through wasn't as dark as this. In other words, the depth of this place was frighteningly deep. Yin Nuashing laughed dryly. He only cared about looking at the sea prison flame and completely ignored the dark color around him. Thinking about it this way, he could probably understand why Yuanshi said it was very dangerous. It was very difficult for people to survive in the deep sea. Other than the lack of sunlight, there was another important factor, which was that the extremely high pressure there would crush the fragile human body into meat paste. Even the gods wouldn't dare to rashly dive into the sea with all their might. Moreover, the bottom of the sea was dark. Once they lost their way, they might not even be able to distinguish the direction. But we still have to make a trip. Although he knew the above conditions, Yin Nuashing still laughed. He had long been mentally prepared for danger. No matter what kind of danger it was, he had to make a trip. Moreover, if he could get through this danger, it wouldn't be called a danger anymore. Seeing his indifferent look, Xian and Yuanshi smiled helplessly. Obviously, they already knew that Yin Nuashing would make a trip. His fearless appearance was the little star they knew. "Then, do we go here first or to the ruins first?" Yuanshi asked. Yin Nuashing paused for a moment. He looked at the red dot, then at the blue and red flame. Then, he looked at the ruins again. After thinking for a while, he said, "Let's go and get this flame first. It's closer than the ruins." "All right." Yuanshi nodded. He looked at the direction and turned the boat around again. Looking at the blue and red flame, Yin Nuashing sighed. It was easy to get it, but it was troublesome to get it back. However, his purple night flame was more powerful, so it shouldn't be too troublesome. Rubbing his head, Yin Nuashing looked to the east with a little anticipation. He wondered what would happen when the divine flames merged. Suddenly, Yin Nuashing felt a little strange. He looked at his empty arms and then at Xian, who was very quiet. He was stunned. Then, he remembered that the two girls seemed to be a little quiet today. Usually, they couldn't stop making noise. He was already used to their laughter. Suddenly, he couldn't hear it. It felt a little strange. Even little Phoenix was silent and sleeping on Ming's head. Looking at the two little girls sitting quietly at the bow of the boat, Yin Nuashing walked over. He glanced at them and then at the sea they were looking at. He scratched his head and reached out to pick them up. "What's wrong, little girls? You've been so quiet." Brother, Ming and little Phoenix were stunned when they saw the face in front of them. Then they called out sweetly. "We're listening," Ming said with a cute smile, revealing two small canine teeth. "Listening." Yin Nuashing was stunned. What was she listening for? "Yes, there's some noise in the sea. Little Purple and Sister Ming are listening to where it's coming from," Little Purple Soul said as she nodded and pinched Yin Nuashing's cheek with her little hand. "There's a noise in the sea?" Hearing this, Yin Nuashing and Xian were both stunned. They looked at each other and saw the confusion in each other's eyes. They didn't hear any noise. "Then what did you hear?" Yin Nuashing shook her head and continued to ask. "We haven't heard anything yet. Just a little strange noise." Little Purple Soul shook her head and blinked. She stretched out her little finger and gestured in front of her. "Puff, puff, puff, puff." "It's a noise." Yin Nuashing rolled her eyes. What kind of abstract description was that? "I can confirm the location. It should be coming from there." Ming pointed in a direction and said. Yin Nuashing looked in the direction her little finger was pointing. Then she looked at the sun in the sky and realized that the place she was talking about was in the south. Moreover, judging from the angle of her little finger, It should be very, very far away in the south because that angle was completely flat. Do you hear anything? Yin Nuashing scratched her head and looked at Xian. She transmitted her voice to him. No. Xian shook his head and transmitted his voice back. That's strange. Yin Nuashing fell into deep thought when she heard this. Then she asked Zai. Little Yi Zai almost rolled off the bed when he heard this extremely mushy address. He had goosebumps all over his body. He quickly shouted, "Damn, that's so mushy. I'm not too sure about what those two girls said. I guess there's some strange energy body under the sea. The energy waves? No, the energy sound waves were captured by them. Moreover, this kind of sound can only be heard by children. Or perhaps only people who are sensitive to energy bodies can sense it," Zai said. So what is it? Yin Nuashing rolled her eyes and said, "How would I know? How would I know? I'm not an encyclopedia." Zai rolled his eyes and snorted softly. All right, that's sea prison flame. You should be able to fuse with it, right? Yin Nuashing suddenly hammered her hands and blinked. You're crazy. Zai opened his mouth and wanted to say these three words. However, he didn't know why he didn't say it. He just paused and pursed his lips. After a while, he said, maybe you're a spiritual divine body. If you can accommodate one divine flame, you should be able to accommodate a second one. Moreover, not to mention the spiritual divine body, the soul-burning art also has this effect. It should be possible, right? Zai gave an uncertain answer. Although he was also a divine flame, he had never been tormented like this before. Therefore, he wasn't sure if he could fuse with it. After all, when many people tried to fuse with divine flames, the flames went berserk and blew themselves into ashes. Yin Nuashing was a special example. He just didn't know if his special ability could transcend this situation. So uncertain, Yin Nuashing pursed her lips and muttered, because I've never tried fusing with flames. However, theoretically speaking, a spiritual divine body can do this. However, if you want to do it, I can very irresponsibly say that you'll have to bear the consequences. Zai spread his hands and said, that's really irresponsible. When Yin Nuashing heard this, black lines appeared on his forehead. Then he sighed. He only had this thought, but he had not decided to do it. If there was anything else, he would wait until he got the sea prison flame. Yin Nuashing opened his eyes and looked at the calm surface of the sea. He lowered his head and looked down. After that, he gently put the two girls down. He saw that Ming Ming and the others had their eyes closed. It was as if they were seriously sensing something. Strange sounds? Yin Nuashing scratched his head and sighed. He didn't pursue the matter. Chapter 383. The temporary change of destination was not too far away from their original destination. Therefore, they were not in a hurry. They continued to drive long, xian-in leisurely, as if they were not worried that someone would get the divine flame before them. Anyway, I'm not in a hurry. The depth of that place is estimated to be a few million miles. It might even reach the core of the earth. No one will be so bored as to jump down there. Yin Nuashing answered Yuan Shi's question in such a manner, which made him lose his temper. However, after thinking for a moment, he was no longer in a hurry. If Yin Nuashing was not in a hurry, why should he be? On the boundless sea, Yin Nuashing and the others drifted along with the waves. The warm sea breeze carried a fishy smell as it brushed against their faces. The warm sunlight made them feel lazy and made Yin Nuashing want to sleep forever. After drifting leisurely for 2 months, the silver boat suddenly stopped at noon one day. Then, the few people who were cultivating on the boat opened their eyes at the same time. They stood up and walked quickly to the side of the boat. When they walked to the side of the boat and looked over, the clear blue water in front of them suddenly turned into a horrifying black color. Even if Yin Nuashing used her evil spirit eye, she could not see how deep the water was. If she looked at it from a high altitude, she would see that there was a huge black hole on the surface of the sea. At the edge of the huge black hole, there was a crescent-shaped island. Dense forests covered the entire island like a primeval forest. A barren aura pervaded the air, as if no one had set foot on this place for a long time. On the other side of the sea, Yin Nuoxing looked at the island that was gradually enlarging in her line of sight. She blinked her eyes and slowly retracted her soul energy that was floating in the air. Then, she heaved a sigh of relief. The surrounding sea gradually turned black. Finally, it was as if they had arrived in a dark and boundless space. Fortunately, they came here during the day. If it was nighttime, they might not even be able to tell the direction. The darkness would even cover the shadow of the island. There are no signs of life on the island. It doesn't seem to be a man-made island. Yin Nuoxing stretched and said lazily, I'm not worried about the people on the island. I'm only worried about whether there's anything under the sea. Yuanxi's face twitched as he spoke. Yin Nuoxing glanced at him and said with a smile, Don't worry. This isn't the endless sea abyss. That giant octopus won't come here. If they come? Yuanxi asked. Then let's eat octopus. Yin Nuoxing grinned. Yuanxi gave him a slap. But this cave is very strange. It's still shallow water near the island. It's only a few meters to a dozen meters deep, but this place seems to have collapsed. This cave was not very wide, about 100 miles in length and width. Standing on the tall dragon Xian silver, one could barely see the edge of the cave. It was still a clear blue, but when one looked down, one could only see darkness, which made one's hair stand on end. Ah, the sound of the ocean is cut off. Suddenly, the two little girls, who had been silent all this time, screamed together, which startled Yin Nuoxing and the others. When Yin Nuoxing heard the screams, her first reaction was to look at where they were and find that they were in the center of the cave. However, according to Ming's words, the vague sound did not come from here. It came from the south, far away. Is there something that's blocking the transmission of the energy sound wave? Yin Nuoxing scratched her head and looked at Yuanxi and Zian. Yuanxi shook his head. He didn't hear anything, so naturally, he didn't know what was going on. Zian also shook her head. She didn't know much either, looking at the island in the distance, then at the clear sky, and finally at the two little girls who were scratching their heads and muttering. Yin Nuoxing tilted her head and said, Forget it. Let's go down now. I feel that something is wrong. Now? Yuanxi was startled, then nodded. Before they set off, he had suggested to speed up the process to avoid any unexpected problems. Now that he heard Yin Nuoxing say so, he naturally didn't object. Okay, let's go then. Zia nodded and hugged little purple soul. Then, she stuffed Ming into Yin Nuoxing's arms and smiled. After making a decision, Yin Nuoxing also breathed a sigh of relief. She lowered her head and looked at the boundless bottom of the sea with a solemn expression. She didn't know what was at the bottom of the sea. If she wanted to enter, she needed to be strong because the extreme pressure below was not something that an ordinary expert could withstand. She guessed that if she wanted to go deep into the sea where the divine flame was, she would need to be at least at the level of God or God of hell. If she didn't have enough energy, it would be hard to predict what would happen. Fortunately, she had two divine weapons to protect her and a godhead weapon. Even if she had to bring a few people with her, it wouldn't be a problem for her. Standing on the long Xian silver and pondering for a while, Yin Nuoxing waved her hand and took out the Nether Void sword, Linghong's sword, and other divine weapons. Then, with a wave of her hand, she enlarged the lunar platform to 6 feet long and wide. The energy that hung down restrained its chi, so that Zian and the others didn't feel too much pressure. As for the long Xian silver, she didn't plan to put it away. She would leave it on the surface of the sea as a coordinate. Her chi was stuck on the long Xian silver. The bottom of the sea was dark, and it was hard to tell the direction. If they barged in recklessly, no one would know where to go to return to the surface of the sea. With a coordinate, it would be much easier to escape if something went wrong. Moreover, there was no one in the sea area nearby. Even if they were robbed, they wouldn't be able to use it. The lunar platform, Nether Void sword, and Linghong sword surrounded them from the top, left, and right. The huge sun cross covered their backs. Yin Nuoxing waved her hand, and the swirling zither appeared in her hand. Then, the other divine weapons surrounded them. After doing all this, Yin Nuoxing was slightly relieved. She let out a breath, and the purple night flame slowly surged out of her body. In the end, it covered the entire area of the divine weapons. From afar, it looked like a huge fireball. Plop! After the flames had completely enveloped them, Yin Nuoxing did not hesitate any longer. With a leap, he brought the few of them and plunged into the sea. When the blazing flames touched the water, it emitted a burst of bubbles. Then, under the sea, the purple fireball gradually shrunk until it disappeared. The calm sea surface once again fell into a deathly silence. Only the enormous Long Xian's silver emitted a faint light, like a guiding light. After diving into the sea, Yun Nuoxing dived downwards with the others. Along the way, he only slightly used the light element to increase his speed. When he felt a pressure coming from all directions, as if it was going to crush them into pieces, he activated the various divine weapons and combined them to form a huge energy shield. He used the energy of the divine weapons. Now that he could do this, he didn't have to worry about the consumption of energy. After releasing the energy, Yun Nuoxing stopped and looked around carefully. He didn't know how deep the sea was. It had already completely blocked the sunlight. It was pitch black and nothing could be seen. Only the purple night flame beside him was like a bright lamp emitting light under the sea. In the faint light, Yin Nuoxing felt a small hand grabbing onto him. There was also a pair of hands tightly hugging his neck. However, no one made a sound. He couldn't help but touch his face and smile. Then, with a flick of his finger, a wisp of light purple flame slowly rose from the tip of his finger. The appearance of this wisp of flame lit up the surroundings. With the help of the flame, everyone could clearly see each other's situation. They all smiled. Then, a faint light element gushed out and rapidly dived downwards. In the boundless depths of the sea, everything was pitch black. Even the purple night flame couldn't illuminate this darkness. And in this pitch-black world, that rapidly diving light purple ring of fire was especially eye-catching. In the light purple fireball, Yin Nuoxing lightly bit his lips. His eyes were full of graveness. They had already been diving for no less than 2 hours. Although they didn't use the light element to hasten their journey, according to his own estimation, they had already dived for a distance of 50,000 kilometers. The gradually increasing pressure in the surroundings had already forced him to use even more divine weapons to resist. But in front of him, he still couldn't see anything. He couldn't even sense the connection between the divine flames. I feel like I'm in hell. In the darkness, She couldn't stand the loneliness and darkness. He couldn't help but say these words, giving Yun Nuoxing a fright. He almost lost his soul. Due to the extreme depth they had dived, the pressure in the surroundings was even more frightening. If not for the help of the many divine weapons and purple night flame, Yin Nuoxing would have already turned into minced meat. But even so, the situation wasn't optimistic. Controlling the divine weapons and divine flames required an enormous amount of mental and soul power. Even if he didn't need to use his own energy, he still had to expend a lot of mental energy to control them, to the extent that he didn't have the spare energy to care about anything else. Ah, yes, it feels like we're in hell. After regaining his senses, Yin Nuoxing nodded stiffly. Although his tone was calm, he was a little anxious. He was calculating the distance and had to store energy to return to the surface of the sea. If he withdrew the energy now, they would be crushed into minced meat in an instant. Just as he was thinking about this, he suddenly felt 4 strands of energy enter his body, causing him to be stunned for a moment. After that, he felt much more relaxed, and only then did he come back to his senses. He looked around and saw that Ziyin and the others were all laughing at the same time. "We'll help you share the burden." Ziyin smiled and rubbed his face against Yun Nuoxing's shoulder. Yun Nuoxing smiled helplessly, but didn't refuse. With the mental energy of the 5 of them, the burden was much smaller. He raised his head and saw nothing but darkness. If they hadn't left Long Xian as a guide before diving down, they would have lost their way long ago. Losing one's way in this deep-sea world was a dead end, even with the help of the light element. Is it really down there? With a heavy sigh, Yin Nuoxing felt a faint fear from the bottom of his heart. The unknown was the scariest thing. Facing the seemingly endless deep-sea world, even if he had the most powerful light element and a god weapon, he still felt helpless. Let's walk a little more. In another 2 hours, no, 1 hour, let's go back. Although the divine flame is very precious, it's not worth risking our lives for it. Yuanxi also frowned and set a time limit. Yin Nuoxing nodded. In this place, if one didn't have the strength of a heavenly god, one would be crushed into a thin pancake by the huge water pressure. It was already a miracle that they were able to reach this place. Brother, I'm scared. Little purple soul, who had been burying her little head in Xian's arms, spoke softly. Even Yin Nuoxing himself felt a little scared in this horrifying darkness, let alone a little girl who was only 3 or 4 years old. It's okay. Brother is here. Little purple, don't be afraid. However, in this emergency, Yin Nuoxing could only comfort her in this way and patted her head. He took the time to look at the little phoenix on Ming's head. At this time, it had also shrunk its head and even its wings tightly, as if it had encountered something scary. Yin Nuoxing smacked his lips and released a little more light element. Then he rushed downwards. If this continues, we'll really reach the core of the earth. After an hour, Yin Nuoxing, who couldn't stand the journey anymore, finally couldn't help but shout. At this time, the 100 divine weapons beside him were all emitting light. Even the Netherworld Ruins sword and Linghong's sword were humming softly. Together, they formed an extremely strong barrier. Only the swirling zither was still. However, this made Yin Nuoxing shudder. The pressure outside had reached a level that was enough to crush the Netherworld King to death. Even if Jin Wang and the others came, they would die without a doubt. Yes, do you want to go back? Xian said very calmly. However, her lily-white hands were tightly clutching Yin Nuoxing's clothes. It seemed that her heart wasn't as calm as it seemed. For our safety, Yuanxi laughed dryly. Brother, let's go back. Little Purple and Ming were so anxious that they were about to cry. They had been nagging for the past hour. Let's go back, let's go back. Yin Nuoxing nodded heavily. However, just as he turned around and prepared to activate the light essence with all his might, the purple night dark flame in his body shook violently. Even the ring of fire outside his body shook violently. The magnitude of the change was so great that everyone could clearly see it. No way. Chapter 384. The sudden outburst of the purple night flame caused Yin Nuoxing and the others to feel their scalps go numb. This was because the purple night flame had to be another type of divine flame to cause such a reaction. The natural opposition between the two types of divine flame could cause such a reaction even from a distance. This also proved that there was indeed a divine flame at the bottom of the sea. However, Yin Nuoxing and the others were not happy at all when the purple night flame reacted in such a way. On the contrary, their conflicted expressions made them look like they were about to cry. Damn it, they were already at the forbidden ground of the Netherworld King. They did not even see the light of the flame, and there was already a reaction. Did this mean that they had to go to the place where the God Emperor died? What should we do? Yin Nuoxing laughed dryly. He was not the only one who made the decision. Instead, he threw out the question. Although he was very interested in the sea prison flame, he still had to see if the others dared to go down. The deep sea was an absolute forbidden ground for life. No life could survive under such extreme pressure. They did not see any life on their way here. It was as if they were the only ones on the lonely bottom of the sea. It was also such a forbidden ground for life that gave birth to the unique divine flame in the realm of the gods. Now, perhaps the great opportunity of the heavens was below, somewhere within reach, but let's go. Yuanxi gritted his teeth, looked at Yin Nuoxing, and nodded. Although they all knew that the danger level was getting higher and higher, they were already here. If they returned empty-handed, they would feel uncomfortable. I'll listen to you. Xian nodded calmly, but her lily-white hand gripped Yin Nuoxing even tighter. Seeing the reluctant look on their faces, Yin Nuoxing laughed bitterly. He was a little touched because this was considered his willful action. They could have forced him to go back, but he did not expect them to agree to go down with him. Although they looked like they were going to die heroically, taking a deep breath, resplendent light essence gushed out of his body in an unending stream, wrapping around that light purple fireball. Then, drawing a resplendent flame on the seabed, he suddenly charged towards the seabed. The crimson light illuminated the darkness as if a sun had suddenly broken into their sight, causing them to close their eyes out of habit. When they opened their eyes again, their eyes were filled with crimson light. A crimson crack stretched across the bottom of the sea, illuminating the deep sea millions of miles below. Rumble. The sunset redness dyed the dark bottom of the ocean. In front of him were two enormous seabeds, and in the middle of the two seabeds was a rugged cliff. The broken crust exposed boiling magma. This was a huge crack at the bottom of the ocean that ran from east to west. Magma spurted out intermittently, and the entire small world was echoing with thunderous noises. Yin could not help but murmur, "The great crevice at the bottom of the sea can be said to be a scar on the earth. Could it be that the divine flame was born in such a vile place? But we're really close to the core of the earth." Yuanshi laughed bitterly. He did not think that they would really reach the bottom of the sea after diving. "Where's the divine flame?" As the two of them sighed, Xian asked a very important question. Hearing this question, Yin Nuashing was stunned, then laughed dryly. They were only focused on sighing at the scenery here, but had forgotten to look for the most important thing. After a short pause, Yin Nuashing knocked on the shining divine weapon, then carefully descended towards the seabed. At a depth of millions of miles, it was a land of death. At this moment, the high pressure here was enough to crush an underworld emperor. Even though Yin Nuashing had so many protective divine weapons, she could only advance cautiously. Apart from the swirling zither, the other divine weapons, including the Netherworld sword, the Linghong sword, and the lunar platform, were all defending with all their might. Landing lightly on the seabed, the few of them did not relax. Instead, they became even more nervous. Yin Nuashing swallowed her saliva, then slowly walked towards the edge of the seabed. Why is there thunder at the bottom of the sea? The loud sound that reverberated in their ears made the tense Yuanshi a little irritated. He could not help but ask. It's the sound of the steam explosion. The seawater near the crevice is vaporizing. The thunder is the steam explosion caused by the vaporization. However, before the steam can leave the surface of the magma, it will turn back into water after cooling down. This cycle repeats, Yin Nuashing explained. Don't tell me we're going to jump into the magma. Yuanshi scratched his head. If you want to end this life earlier and enter the next life, you can jump into the magma. Yin Nuashing stuck out her tongue, then laughed. Millions of miles under the sea. We've just reached the Earth's crust, but there's already such pressure. There's no need to talk about the magma. Furthermore, the temperature there is comparable to some of the lower-ranked divine flames. Do you want to go there? Yuanshi face-bombed and did not say anything, although Yin Nuashing was laughing very easily. In fact, in such a strange place, if he did not deliberately relax, the psychological pressure would probably crush him. Walking at the edge of the seabed, Yin Nuashing stretched her neck to look at the reddish-gold crevice. Her evil spirit eye looked deep into the magma ocean, and she could see a deathly black magma. The moment she saw the black magma, her evil spirit eye actually felt like it was going to burn up. She was so frightened that she hurriedly closed her eyes. I think I saw something moving, Ziyin said coldly, which made Yin Nuashing stare blankly. Then, he opened his eyes wide and looked at Ziyin. In the magma? Yuanshi also asked suspiciously. Ziyin nodded. She seemed to have seen something scurrying past, but she did not see it clearly. She was not sure if the black color that was different from the magma was a living thing. Do you feel that something is wrong? Is it unbelievable? Yin Nuashing smiled and said, Life is a very strange thing. We believe that there will be no life in an extremely harsh environment. Perhaps things will move in the opposite direction when they reach an extreme. A place that is too harsh will instead give birth to strange creatures that ordinary people do not know. Magma is also a breeding ground for life. Moreover, even at the bottom of the sea, there may be living things. Dragons? Zian asked. Yes, dragons have very strong bodies. The high density of their bodies makes them indestructible. Even high temperature and high pressure cannot destroy them. Dragons are not reptiles that only lay eggs in caves. The deep sea is also an ideal breeding ground for them. Yin Nuashing smiled. Yin Nuashing and the others moved slowly along the magma river towards the east. The slow consumption of energy gave them a lot of time to explore, but in this oppressive atmosphere, no one wanted to stay any longer. Therefore, after the initial slow pace, they gradually sped up to the point where they had to jog. Taking the time to take out the treasure map, Yin Nuashing glanced at the swaying blue-red flame. Beside the flame, a small red dot flickered slightly. It was not far away, which made him heave a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and sped up to run towards that place. The further east they went, the steeper the cliff under the seabed became. The magma here seemed to be descending a slope instead of gathering on a flat surface. The color of the magma also changed from the original scarlet red to an azure blue. By the time Yin Nuashing discovered this, they had already walked a few thousand meters, but they still had not found the flame that they were looking forward to. Damn it, is this really here? Don't tell me we have to jump into the magma? When the magma changed from azure blue to scarlet gold, Yuanshi finally could not help but curse. Yin Nuashing laughed bitterly. In fact, he also had the same thought. After searching for such a long time, he didn't see anything. Moreover, ever since he reached the seabed, the strange fluctuations from the purple night flame had also disappeared. It was quiet, as if it had never gone berserk. Purple night, can you help to sense it? Yin Nuashing sighed and asked. It's right in front. We'll reach it if we continue walking forward. We'll reach it soon. Purple Night smiled and said. Yin Nuashing rolled his eyes and took out the treasure map as he walked. At this moment, the red dot was already very close to the flame. It was even close to the edge. Perhaps they really would reach it if they took another 2 steps. All right, let's walk a little more. Yin Nuashing laughed bitterly. With a wave of his hand, the pale purple flame jumped on his palm. Yin Nuashing held it and looked at the magma sea below. He took a deep breath and jogged with the others. After running like this for more than 10 minutes, the swaying light purple flower on their palms suddenly shrunk. The energy that erupted caused a few of them to be nailed to the ground. After that, their gazes immediately followed the direction of the flower and looked down. At that moment, their hearts felt as though they had been ruthlessly pinched. In the boundless magma sea, an azure flame covered with red patterns was slowly swimming. As it swam, it seemed as if the energy of the entire sea was continuously surging towards it. Sea prison flame. Looking at the azure flame with red spots, Yin Nuashing heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't expect that this divine flame was really born in the magma. However, it was on the surface of the magma. Fortunately, they didn't jump into the magma. Just as Yin Nuashing was about to jump down with the others, Zian suddenly pointed at the sea prison flame below and shouted in shock. "Little star, there's someone there." The joy in his eyes immediately turned into shock. Yin Nuashing quickly stretched his neck and looked in the direction that Zian was pointing at in disbelief. He immediately gasped. 2 meters in front of the sea prison flame, a golden figure was sitting cross-legged. The sea prison flame was extending small flames to wrap around the figure. This person was sitting very close to the mountain wall. In addition, his color was similar to the reddish-gold magma. If one didn't pay attention, it would be difficult to discover that it was a person. The sea prison flame floated quietly in front of the figure. Traces of flames drilled out from its source and surged into the person's body. Yin Nuashing, who had the experience of subduing divine flames, naturally knew what was going on. However, what made him even more shocked was that there was actually someone in this deep sea. Moreover, although he couldn't sense the strength of this person, he could confirm that this person definitely hadn't reached the beginner god level. Yin Nuashing had seen many gods. Every one of them had a unique aura that had been transformed by deification. He definitely wouldn't forget the unique energy of the gods. However, this person who was subduing the divine flame hadn't reached the beginner god level, but had already come to this abyss of danger. How could he not be shocked? This was the abyss of danger that even the emperor of the underworld couldn't enter. As if sensing something, the golden figure slowly opened his eyes and turned his head. Under the long golden hair that draped over his shoulders, a thin face was revealed. He looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. There wasn't a trace of emotion on his delicate face. His eyes were also as empty as death. It was as if his heart had been frozen and no more emotions could be revealed. It's him. Chapter 385. It's him. When Yin Nuoxing saw that pair of empty golden eyes, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. This was not the first time he had seen this pair of emotionless eyes. The first time he had seen it was in Li Huan's city in the wormhole. He had felt that a pair of eyes had been watching him from the beginning to the end. Every time he searched for that pair of eyes in the sea of people, he would only see this pair of indifferent golden eyes, which would quickly disappear from his line of sight. He didn't expect that he would be able to see it here, and this time, it wasn't just a pair of eyes, it was a living young man in front of him. Do you know him? Hearing Yin Nuoxing's words, Yuanshi was shocked and quickly asked, I don't know him. Yin Nuoxing shook his head and told him what he felt at the trade fair. However, he didn't say what he and Zi felt. After hearing this, Yuanshi frowned and looked at the pair of empty golden eyes. He couldn't help but shudder and said, Let's not talk about anything else first. What should we do now? The sea prison flame seems to have been snatched first. Yin Nuoxing frowned. He wanted to stop him, but due to various factors, he really couldn't do it. First of all, that person was in the final stage of subduing and would be able to put away the sea prison flame soon. Second, he had used all the weapons on him to protect himself, so he didn't have any more weapons to use against him. It didn't seem wise to fight someone who didn't fear the pressure of the deep sea with his bare hands. If he used the whirlpool zither, it would be like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It didn't seem worth it to exchange one chance for a divine flame. Yin Nuoxing was a little confused because of all these reasons. He didn't know how to solve this problem. He didn't want to give up, but he couldn't snatch it either. What could he do? While Yin Nuoxing was in a daze, the young man slowly turned his head and closed his empty eyes. As for the sea prison flame, when he closed his eyes, the speed at which the flame threads transmitted energy increased by several times. Perhaps Yin Nuoxing's arrival made him feel a little pressured, but his subduing was completed in less than 2 minutes after the last bit of energy entered the young man's body. He exhaled a scorching breath. Then, he waved his sleeve, and a demonic blue-red flame appeared in his palm. With a thought, the flame was like a long snake that slithered between the young man's fingers. Seeing this, the young man clenched his fist and put it away. His stiff face was still indifferent, without a trace of expression. He didn't even seem to be happy that he had subdued the divine flame. It was as if he had done it mechanically. Little Star, what do we do? The sea prison flame has been taken by him, Xian said nervously when he saw the young man's actions. Cold sauce. Yin Nuoxing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had worked so hard to come to this godforsaken place where birds didn't lay eggs and fishes didn't swim. Now that he finally saw the sea prison flame, he didn't expect that someone would beat him to it. This was the first time he had experienced this feeling of failure. The young man put away the sea prison flame and slowly stood up. He turned his head to look at Yin Nuoxing. His indifferent golden eyes suddenly surged with an extremely faint, murderous intent. Again, Yin Nuoxing frowned when he felt that faint murderous intent. The swirling zither in his arms buzzed softly. One of his hands even touched the zither strings that were sealed by the azure energy chains. Although he didn't know why this person had murderous intent towards him twice, he had no choice but to use the swirling zither for their safety if he really made a move, even though this might cause the East Sea to sink. A storm seemed to be quietly gathering at the bottom of the sea millions of kilometers away. The light elements in his body turned into a long river and flowed rapidly, dyeing Yun Nuoxing's meridians a brilliant gold. Through his fair skin, golden veins could even be seen. Half of his light purple hair also turned a brilliant gold. Seeing Yun Nuoxing's transformation, Xian and Luo Binghe were shocked. When they came back to their senses, they grasped Yun Nuoxing tightly. From the looks of it, he was about to activate the emergency escape plan. If they were to fight at the bottom of the sea with the swirling zither, Xian and Luo Binghe would definitely be reluctant to do so. The only thing left was to escape. Once they escaped to the surface of the sea, everything would be fine. The young man also took in the situation here. His stiff face didn't change at all. His arm slipped out of his sleeve, and he clenched his fist. Dark yellow energy slowly flowed out of his body and gathered in his right hand. The sea prison flame that he had just subdued appeared in his other hand and wrapped around the dark yellow longsword. The moment the two appeared, the surrounding space and time seemed to suddenly become blurry. The nearby sea also went berserk because of the appearance of the sea prison flame. The turbulent waves of magma rose 100 meters high and smashed back fiercely. The young man tapped his feet on the magma and gently jumped onto the seabed. He landed a few meters in front of Yun Nuoxing and raised his head. His golden eyes revealed a hint of coldness as he looked at the latter. There was also a faint glow in his eyes. The young man took a few steps forward. The long sword in his hand drew a thin line on the seabed. He walked in front of Yun Nuoxing, raised his long sword, and suddenly pointed it between Yun Nuoxing's eyebrows. Seeing his actions, Yun Nuoxing's eyebrows twitched. However, she didn't dodge. Putting aside the fact that there was a layer of energy barrier around them, this young man didn't seem to have any killing intent. Therefore, she wasn't in a hurry to dodge. "I don't approve of you." The long sword was pointed at the space between Yun Nuoxing's eyebrows as the young man's indifferent voice slowly sounded out, echoing in the minds of the former few. This indifferent voice, without a shred of emotion, made the few of them feel very uncomfortable when they heard it. This voice did not sound like it was spoken by a human, but more like the low growl of a cold-blooded and heartless beast. "Who wants your approval? What a strange fellow." Yun Nuoxing rolled her eyes in her heart. However, she didn't say it out loud. She only muttered in her heart. Perhaps sensing the change in Yun Nuoxing's mood, the young man narrowed his eyes. He suddenly opened the long sword in his hand. The deep yellow long sword seemed to ignore the buoyancy and suddenly pierced into the seabed. Specks of light flowed out. Then, under the doubtful gazes of Yun Nuoxing and the others, it turned into a pool of liquid and melted into the ground. Yun Nuoxing looked at the young man in confusion. Being cautious, she faintly felt that something was wrong. She hurriedly turned around and pulled Xian and the others. Light elements surged out, and she was about to bring them away from this place. However, at the moment when the light elements exploded, the pool of dark yellow liquid that had melted on the ground suddenly wriggled rapidly. Then it split into thousands of thin lines and quickly drew a mysterious array on the seabed. And the eye of the array was facing Yun Nuo and the others were preparing to escape. As soon as the array was formed, Yun Nuoxing keenly sensed that the power of space in the vicinity was completely disordered. Even time seemed to have changed. This made her heart skip a beat. This was definitely the power of time. She had only experienced it once, and this was the second time. Knowing how powerful the light element was, she also knew how powerful the power of time was. Illusory time, lost domain. After the array was formed, the young man waved her hand. A wisp of faint yellow energy flowed out from her body and entered the array at the bottom of her feet. After receiving this energy, the array suddenly started to rotate. The chaotic power of time and space soared into the sky. Under this power, Yun Nuoxing and the others were sealed in the array before they could even react. Millions of miles under the sea, a huge, deep yellow barrier was emitting a soft, buzzing sound. The young man stood in front of the barrier and stroked it twice. His eyes that were filled with coldness gradually regained their indifference. He casually glanced at it twice. Then, with a flash of his body, he disappeared on the spot. Only an indifferent voice hovered in the air. You are not qualified. In the array, the moment Yin Nuoxing came back to her senses, she saw a huge barrier erected around her. Her body was still wrapped in light energy that was about to explode. In this space that was completely isolated from the outside world, Yin Nuoxing felt an unprecedented danger. It was even more dangerous than what she had encountered in the Tana's Water God Temple. The power of time. Taking a deep breath, Yin Nuoxing could not help but mutter. When Xian and the others heard it, they widened their eyes in shock. Then, they hurriedly tried to sense it, but did not sense any special energy. Don't move. Just stay where you are. It's very dangerous here. Seeing that Yuan-Shi was about to take a step forward, Yin Nuoxing was anxious. She hurriedly pulled him back and said hurriedly. Although she did not know what kind of danger there was, her intuition told her that this was a dangerous place and a deadly array. When Yuan-Shi heard this, he hurriedly withdrew his foot. Then, he opened his eyes and looked at Yin Nuoxing. He had never come into contact with the power of time, so he did not have a strategy to deal with it. Zai, what should we do now? Yin Nuoxing scratched his head and smiled bitterly. Being trapped in this inexplicable time formation, he had no idea what to do. The power of time was something that only the gods of the later stages of the divine level could come into contact with. He didn't expect that the young man, who was also at the immortal level, could also use it. This could also explain why he could stay in this dangerous place unscathed. He had the power to control time, which made him almost invincible. Illusory time, lost domain. Zai, who heard Yin Nuoxing shout, did not pay attention to him. She just softly said these 4 words, which made the former stunned. Ah, you mean this array? I did hear him shout that, but what's wrong with this array? Yin Nuoxing nodded and said, Illusory time, lost domain. Ignoring him, Zai kept repeating these 4 words. She seemed to be very confused and frustrated. She seemed to remember what it was, but she forgot it in an instant. Hearing her repeatedly repeating the name of this array, Yin Nuoxing also fell silent. She reminded the others and closed her eyes to think. Hiss! After waiting like this for a long time, Zai suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. The shock was transmitted to him, causing his heart to tremble violently and giving him a fright. What's wrong? What's wrong? Why did you have such a big reaction? Yin Nuoxing, who almost fainted from the cold air, quickly calmed her mind and asked, Illusory time, lost domain. Illusory time, lost domain. Zai gulped and said it twice with a trembling voice. Then, she forced herself to calm down. She sighed and said solemnly, In this world, there's a kind of physique that can naturally control a kind of energy that ordinary people can't come into contact with. The power of time? Yin Nuoxing was stunned and continued. Yes. Zai nodded and continued. However, because this kind of physique is too heaven-defying, people with this kind of physique will not have any elements in their souls, nor will they be able to accept any elements into their bodies. In this kind of person's life, the only energy they can control is the power of time and space. Moreover, because they are innately compatible with the power of time, they will be more proficient in using it than gods. Innately, Yin Nuoxing's face twitched. When she heard that there were no elements, she sighed in relief. If they could already control time, if there were still elements, then it would really be illogical. Illusory as real, real as empty. To it, everything seems to wander between illusory and real. There are no real individuals, nor are there any illusory shadows. The whole person seems to have been created by time, and in the end, will also return to time. Yin Nuoxing was stunned. The more he listened to this introduction, the more familiar it sounded. He seemed to have seen this introduction before. It was in the pile of books in Rain Country. The name of that physique seemed to be called Illusory Time Physique. 2 solemn voices rang out in the great array at the same time, and when this name was spoken, the time and space here froze again. Chapter 386. Illusory Time Physique. Hearing this unfamiliar physique, Yuan-Shi was stunned. Then he laughed bitterly. Where did this physique come from? He had never heard of it before. However, from the name, one could tell that this physique was related to time. The array here was called the illusory time, lost domain. In other words, the mysterious young man was the owner of this physique. Yin Nuoxing nodded and slowly explained the situation that he and Ziyi understood. After listening to it, Yuan-Shi's jaw dropped to the point of dislocating as expected. This doesn't make sense. How can there be such a perverted person in this world? Yuan-Shi roared at the sky. He grabbed his head with both hands and looked like a crazy demon. His handsome face became abnormally ferocious. It seemed that this physique that suddenly appeared out of nowhere had dealt a big blow to his well-known divine spirit physique. It's fine if there's a divine spirit physique. It's fine if there's a 5 elements physique. But what the hell is this illusory time physique? Yuan-Shi was so frightened that he could not take care of himself. His sharp screams made Yin Nuoxing and the others cover their ears. Innate power of time. Yuan-Shi laughed foolishly as if he had eaten shit. Yin Nuoxing mourned for him for a while. It was no wonder that he would be like this. Originally, the divine spirit physique was one of the strongest physiques in everyone's eyes. Who would have thought that some of the physiques that disappeared with the destruction of ancient books would be even more excessive? However, this illusory time physique was not recorded by anyone and then compared with other physiques in the world. This was because this physique had a flaw, and this flaw could not be remedied. The illusory time physique could not achieve great success. In other words, the illusory time physique could not reach the divine stage. There was no other reason other than this physique was too heaven-defying and overbearing. Perhaps this was also a form of disguised fairness. Compared to other physiques that could reach great success, this magical physique would fall behind in the future. But if you really want to calculate it, it should be on par with your spiritual divine body. After experiencing the initial shock, Ziyi also calmed down. Because she had lost her composure just now, she was still blushing a little, which made Yin Nuoxing look at her with interest. How? There's no comparison. Upon hearing this result, Yin Nuoxing rolled her eyes and said, "He controls time, while I can contain the energy of all things. No matter how you look at it, I'm the weaker one. How can you compare? Is the power of time considered energy?" Ziyi raised his eyebrows and looked at Yin Nuoxing with disdain, as if he was looking at a fool. "Of course I can," Yin Nuoxing said matter-of-factly. However, before he could finish, he was stunned. Seeing his dumbfounded expression, Zai couldn't help but sneer. The power of time was an energy that only gods at the later stages of the god level could come into contact with. Since it was energy, it could be contained and refined by the spiritual divine body. As long as it was energy, no matter what kind of energy it was, Yin Nuoxing could absorb it through his constitution and make it a part of his body. In other words, as long as Yin Nuoxing could contain the power of time, even if he couldn't touch the power of time, he could use this mysterious power very well. "Okay, you win." Yin Nuoxing smiled bitterly and nodded. She said, "But let's put aside the matter of constitution first. How we get out of here?" "Eat it," Z said. "What?" Yin Nuoxing was stunned. She wondered if her ears weren't working well and if she had heard wrong. "I said, eat this illusory time maize field." Z glanced at him and said, "Just like your 9th heaven soul-lurking formation, the illusory time maize field is the origin of the illusory time maize field. It contains extremely pure power of time and space. The complex matrix set up here is something that even Jin Wang and the others can't do anything about. However, you're different. All the mazes set up by the power of time and space in this world can be broken by the Netherworld Ruin Sword. However, don't you think it's a bit of waste? Why don't you use the spiritual divine body to eat this origin formation? Who knows, you might be able to obtain the power of time." After hearing this, Yin Nuoxing nodded in realization. The power of time was something that countless people dreamed of. If it were him, he might have used the Netherworld Ruins sword to destroy it before he could react. However, after hearing Ziye's words, he suddenly felt that this great formation seemed to be a springboard for him. It allowed him to jump to a place that didn't belong to him for the time being. Moreover, in his mind, there was a section about the cultivation of time in the colored glaze divine technique. He coveted it very much. However, because he didn't have the power of time, he didn't pay attention to it. Now, if he could absorb the power of time here, would he be able to cultivate it? Come on, with your little energy, you'll be drained of all your energy before long. Ziyi, who knew what he was thinking, laughed coquettishly and poured a bucket of cold water on him. Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing pulled himself back from his pleasant surprise. Indeed, mobilizing the power of time required a large amount of energy. With his small immortal-level body, it probably wouldn't take long for it to disintegrate on its own. Thinking about it this way, the illusory time body was quite terrifying. It could mobilize the power of time without restraint. Because one's body was compatible with the power of time, it didn't need to expend much energy at all. Activating such a great formation was as easy as lifting one's hand. Well, let's go out first. Staying here makes me uncomfortable. Yin Nuoxing spread out his hands. In an instant, he threw all his thoughts to the back of his mind and said slowly. After speaking, Yin Nuoxing exhaled lightly and smiled at Ziyin and Ziyi. It's okay, we have a way to break it. Hearing this, the two of them were startled. Then, joy appeared on their faces as they heaved a sigh of relief. Seeing this, Yin Nuoxing smiled and opened his arms slightly. He took a deep breath and then put his hands together to form a series of complicated seals. Following the changes of his hand seals, a shocking fluctuation appeared in this sealed space. This great formation seemed to know what he was doing and wanted to activate. 9 Heaven Spirit Formation, Refine. However, before the illusory time, May's domain activated, Yin Nuoxing's hand seals paused. The golden energy that filled his body gushed out like a tsunami. He clenched his fist, and a palm-sized formation core appeared in his hand. Then it suddenly expanded. The 9 Heaven Spirit Formation was the origin formation of the divine body. The power of the formation increased as the number of spiritual objects that the divine body could contain increased. It could be used to construct a formation that could be used by the divine body. Other than being used to fight enemies, it could also be used for refining. This kind of refining was more for refining the energy in the body. The 9 Heaven Spirit Formation expanded until it was the same size as the illusory time, May's domain. Yin Nuoxing's hand seals changed again, and the great formation suddenly spun and smashed towards the ladder. Then, under the nervous gazes of the few people, the two cores of the great formation slowly touched. There was no violent explosion as expected. As soon as the 9 Heaven Spirit Concealment Formation was attached to it, the illusory time, lost domain, erupted with a shocking amount of energy. However, when the energy came into contact with the formation, it melted into nothingness like snow. Then, traces of dark yellow energy were extracted from the formation and poured into the 9 Heaven Spirit Concealment Formation. In just a few seconds, the energy that covered the entire formation was close to being exhausted. While the 9 Heaven Spirit Concealment Formation was refining the illusory time, lost domain, Yin Nuoxing suddenly felt that the ladder's pure time force was rapidly being broken down into primitive energy particles by the 9 Heavens Spirit Concealment Formation. What shocked him was that after the 9 Heavens Spirit Concealment Formation absorbed the time force, he could clearly feel a pure dark yellow energy appearing in his body without any warning. It's true, Yin Nuoxing was stunned for a while. Although he had expected it, he didn't expect it to really be able to refine the time energy. After a while, with a thought, he refined the pure time energy and integrated it into his body. After a while, the illusory time, May's domain, completely collapsed due to the lack of energy. As the dark yellow barrier disappeared, Yin Nuoxing and the others once again saw the chilling darkness. Behind them, there was a bright golden light. Obviously, they were still at the bottom of the sea, thousands of miles away from where Yin Nuoxing and the others were. a young man slowly opened his eyes and looked in their direction. He took a deep breath and muttered, "The illusory time, May's domain, has been broken." "Spiritual, godly body?" the young man said faintly. Then, the corners of his mouth that seemed to be stiff actually curled into a smile. "That's interesting." As his voice fell, the young man slowly stood up and took one last look at the place where the sea and sky merged. Then, his figure flashed and disappeared from the spot. Only his voice gradually dissipated. "I still need a little more time." "Wait, it won't be too long." At the bottom of the sea, Yin Nuashing stretched and put away the 9 heavens soul concealment array. Then, with a strange smile, he looked at Yuan Shi and spread out his right hand. A wave of energy with specks of starlight slowly surged out and gathered in the center of his palm. Then, the power of the stars retracted into his body, leaving behind a head-sized dark yellow energy. The space around this energy seemed to distort. Time. Energy? Seeing this obvious symbol, Yuan Shi suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air and covered his mouth in disbelief. He forced himself not to scream out loud. His fish eyes were opened so wide that they were about to split open. Calm down, calm down." Yin Nuashing smiled slightly. The time energy was a mysterious power that only those who had reached the god level could come into contact with. Before reaching that level, even the God Emperor did not have the right to possess it. However, Yin Nuashing's palm condensed a real ball of time energy. This time energy is the feedback from refining his illusory time, May's domain, Yin Nuashing explained with a smile. "If that's the case, he's not rushing over to deliver energy to you." Ziyin covered her mouth as she laughed and said. Yin Nuashing shrugged. That was not wrong. Although he did not obtain the sea prison flame, he unexpectedly obtained the time energy. It was a small compensation. Anyway, now, I seem to be able to barely, very barely, abnormally barely, control time. Although it's just a little, Yin Nuashing laughed dryly. Then, under the curious gazes of the two people, he turned around and stretched out his hand. He clenched his fist, and, as he clenched his fist, the churning magma beneath him actually stopped moving for an instant. Stopping time was an ability that belonged to the gods. Now, Yin Nuashing, who was still at the immortal stage, displayed it. Chapter 387. That's a leap. She hasn't even mastered the power of space, but she mastered the power of time first. Yuan Shi couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly when he saw that scene. The people around him were getting more and more abnormal. Yin Nuashing tilted her head and smiled strangely. Her entire body suddenly became as bright as a star. Under the light element, there was even a thin layer of the power of time. The combination of the two could definitely frighten people to death. Ziyin, who had just regained his senses, turned pale with fright when he saw Yin Nuashing's appearance. He then saw the excitement on Yin Nuashing's face. How could he not know that this little fool was excited because she had obtained a new power? From the looks of it, she was going to fly rapidly again. However, despite being frightened, Ziyin immediately hugged Yin Nuashing and the two girls tightly. Yuan Shi, who hadn't recovered from his shock and was still muttering to himself, suddenly screamed in a golden light at the bottom of the sea. A golden light rushed to the surface like a volcanic eruption. Accompanying the golden light was a mournful cry. Bang! Yin Nuashing, who was in a state of excitement, suddenly felt her heart skip a beat. The pendant under her clothes suddenly shone brightly, and a colorful scroll appeared in her hand. At this moment, the scroll that hadn't reacted and hadn't been seen before was emitting a faint warmth. She was also acting strangely. Yin Nuashing's sprinting figure didn't stop abruptly. The excitement on her face faded, and her heart was beating like a drum, making her restless. She stared intently at the gorgeous scroll, surrounded by several layers of energy particles, and narrowed her eyes slightly. This scroll was taken from Mu Ingzi's tomb by Yin Nuashing. Although she had asked Mu Ingzi about it before, he didn't tell her anything. It seemed like even he didn't know what it was. Ever since she obtained it, she hadn't investigated it, because the scroll couldn't be opened no matter what. She even used the Netherworld Ruins sword to knock on it, but there was still no reaction. However, at this moment, there was a slight reaction. Clearly, it was because of the deep sea. Perhaps it was in the lava world at the bottom of the sea. When Xian first saw this scroll, she was a little shocked and a little confused. Thinking about how she said that this scroll was left behind by God, Yin Nuoxing felt a little restless. A god stood at the pinnacle of this world. Yin Nuoxing hadn't personally witnessed the power of a god, but he had seen Xian disregard everything and bring him across the Milky Way. He had a rough idea of what a god was like. A god could probably make the entire world submit to her. A scroll left behind by a god was enough to cause a bloodbath in the world of the gods. Countless gods had gone to the underground palace of the god of the glaze. However, the underground palace was empty and there was nothing in it. There was only a strange Jiucheng Hall, which seemed to have lost its reputation. Like an arrow, Yin Nuoxing shot towards the surface of the sea. He looked at the people beside him, who had their eyes tightly shut. He couldn't help but glance behind him. However, he had already left the bottom of the sea at full speed. Behind him, there was only an empty, pitch-black void. The restlessness in his heart lasted for a long time before Yin Nuoxing gradually suppressed it. He slowly exhaled and kept the scroll. He didn't turn back and rush down, even though he knew that there was something there that could trigger a reaction from the scroll. He also understood how dangerous a place that concern a god was. Although he had many godly weapons in his hands, he didn't think that he could safely barge in and escape unscathed. The next time I see Xian, we'll talk about it again. Yin Nuoxing muttered in his heart. Then he heaved a huge sigh of relief. If he went there now, he would definitely be courting death. However, if he brought a god with him, there shouldn't be any danger. It's rare that you can resist the urge to turn back and rush down. Just as he finished speaking, Ziya's voice rang out, giving him a fright. An item left behind by God. This level of temptation is enough to make even a god emperor go crazy. I didn't expect that our little star would turn a blind eye to it. Ziyi smiled. Yin Nuoxing rolled his eyes and said, I'm not that stupid. I still remember what happened in the heavenly God Glaze's underground palace. I don't have a right to turn back and rush down like that. What if I die? Yin Nuoxing paused for a moment before asking, You really don't know what this is? To be honest, he thought that Ziyi should know something. She could even recognize the mark of the heavenly god of that era, Song Yin Lu Xing. He couldn't figure out what she didn't know, even though she always said that she just happened to know. I don't know. Ziyi shook her head and said, This colorful scroll doesn't have any special markings, and it doesn't have any energy smell that I know. There are also no ancient books that specifically record this thing. No matter how you ask me, it's useless. Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing smiled bitterly. This scroll was completely useless. There was nothing on it, and it couldn't be opened. None of the people around him knew what was recorded on it. Xian seemed to have some clues, but she couldn't confirm it. Lan Xin also didn't know anything. Ziyi obviously didn't know anything either. However, I don't know what's below, but I can guess that the thing below should have something to do with you. Ziya's sudden words shocked Yin Nuoxing so much that his mind went blank. He almost stopped breathing. Or rather, it has something to do with the divine body. Ziyi felt that he might have misunderstood something. She quickly added, Your blood is boiling. It should have something to do with your physique. Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing heaved a sigh of relief. He thought that there was something below that had something to do with his past. He almost couldn't control himself and wanted to rush down. Could it be something left behind by the divine body of the previous generation? As this thought flashed through his mind, Yin Nuoxing swallowed his saliva. If it really had something to do with the divine body of the previous generation, he would have to make a trip down there in the future. Yin Nuoxing had always wanted to see what the previous generation's godly physique looked like. However, only when a godly physique of receiving souls disappeared would another godly physique be born. In other words, every generation of godly physiques of receiving souls would not see another godly physique of receiving souls. However, Even if he could not see the real person, he would be satisfied to see the things left behind, just like the cultivation scroll he obtained in the Tana's water god temple. After he sprinted for a distance with his people, his thundering heartbeat finally calmed down. He heaved a sigh of relief. His heartbeat was so loud that he could hear it clearly. Perhaps it really had something to do with his physique. After all, his soul didn't seem to have any special reaction. With the help of the power of time and the element of light, Yun Nuoxing traveled extremely quickly. In less than 10 minutes, he felt that the pressure of the seawater had plummeted. Obviously, they weren't far from the surface. Yun Nuoxing slowly heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He looked back at the pitch-black underwater world and muttered in his heart, "I will come again in the future." Plop! On the quiet surface of the sea, there was no wind or waves. A huge silver ship stood quietly on the surface of the sea. The sea was still as silent as ever. Suddenly, there was a loud sound of something breaking through the water. Then, a 1,000-feet-tall wave exploded on the surface of the sea, almost overturning the silver ship. Then, a few figures surrounded by light rushed into the sky and stopped in the sky. Finally, they slowly landed on the ship. "We finally left that damn place." Yun Nuoxing couldn't help but smile as he wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. This underwater adventure had really frightened them. Although they didn't obtain their original goal, they had received an equally precious compensation. "Yes, we finally stopped." Yuanxi's pale face curled up into a smile with difficulty. Just as he muttered that, he suddenly collapsed on the side of the ship and fainted. Yun Nuoxing laughed dryly. "Little star, you're so naughty." Xian's pretty face was also pale. Her jade-like hands were already glued to Yun Nuoxing's body and couldn't be pulled away. They hadn't even gotten used to the speed they usually traveled at, but now they were given the speed of light enhanced by the power of time. No matter who it was, they couldn't stand it. "Good girl, go to sleep. You'll be fine when you wake up." Yun Nuoxing grinned and gently patted Xian's head. Xian blankly nodded her head, and just like that, she fell asleep while hanging on his body. As for the two girls, Feng Ming, they had already fallen asleep long ago. Suddenly, only Yun Nuoxing, this one awake person, was left on the entire ship. After settling everyone down, Yun Nuoxing sat cross-legged on the ship and took out the treasure map. He looked at their current location, then glanced at the ruins in the upper right corner, then looked to the south at the distant Fanya Mountain. He took a deep breath. Looking at the northern sky, Yun Nuoxing lowered his head to look at the beauty sleeping on his lap. The smile on his face slowly widened. Looking at her sleeping posture, he suddenly remembered the scene of their first meeting. That peach blossom forest, that chance encounter. Well, let's go to the historical remains as soon as possible. After that, let's turn around and go to the Fengyan Mountain. We need to quickly heal this girl's body. Yun Nuoxing muttered to himself as he gently rubbed Ziyan's head with his palm. There's a sour smell of love. Suddenly, Yuan Shi, who was supposed to be unconscious, struggled to wake up. He said this rather weakly, giving Yun Nuoxing a big fright. "Hey, didn't you pass out?" Yun Nuoxing rolled his eyes, then froze for a moment. His handsome face turned red, and he slapped him across the air. He roared, "What sour smell of love? We're not. Besides, don't you have a sour smell of love? And it's very strong." After being slapped by Yun Nuoxing, Yuan Shi almost fainted again. After hearing this, he laughed a few times. Then, he suddenly quieted down. His expression changed slightly. He looked a little gloomy, as if he was a little nervous. "What's wrong?" Seeing him like this, Yun Nuoxing was stunned for a moment. He casually swept his gaze across the surface of the sea, thinking that he had seen something. However, he didn't find anything. "I feel a little uneasy. My right eyelid keeps twitching as if something is going to happen." Yuan Shi sighed and muttered as he lay on the ship. "Uneasy?" Yun Nuoxing wanted to retort, but he didn't say anything. It was as if he had tacitly agreed. He nodded, looked at the sky in the northeast, and took a deep breath. "Why? Do you have this feeling too?" Yuan Shi turned his head and smiled. "I thought you would say that I, a dignified cultivator, actually believe in this kind of superstition." If you believe it, then it exists. If you don't believe it, then it doesn't exist. Yin Nuoxing raised a finger in front of his mouth, closed his right eye, and smiled mysteriously. However, I personally believe in it because Yin Nuoxing muttered. He looked up at the transparent sky and sighed. I also feel that there's something strange. Chapter 388. On the boundless ocean, a silver-white ship was traveling at high speed. The waves on both sides of the ship were splashing a few meters high. The ship seemed to be in a hurry, as if there were soldiers chasing after it. However, on this calm ocean, this lonely ship was the only one that seemed lifeless. The people on the ship did not seem to be in a hurry. They were all sitting cross-legged on the ship with their eyes closed. There was even a gust of energy circling around them. It was obvious that they had entered a state of cultivation. The journey was long, and cultivating was the best way to pass the time. The only downside was that it was too boring. On the path of cultivation, if one did not advance, one would fall behind. Yin Nuoxing and the others knew this very well. During the long journey, when they had nothing to do, they obediently sat down cross-legged to cultivate. They were not the only ones who were monotonous and dull. The sea area they were in was also dull and dull. It was a uniform blue, as if there were no other colors in the world. This journey had already lasted for more than a month. For Yin Nuoxing and the others who were used to traveling long distances, this period of time was just a blink of an eye. They opened their eyes to welcome the morning sun, closed their eyes to send off the bright moon. Day after day, along the way, there were no soldiers chasing after them. The golden guide did not appear again. It was so peaceful that it was as if nothing had happened. After leaving the abyss, Ming and Little Purple Soul once again entered a state of listening. One day, Yin Nuoxing and the others also began to listen out of curiosity. The result was obvious. After a day, they did not hear anything. It was just as Z had said, that only the two girls could hear it. In a trance, a month had passed unknowingly. When the first rays of the morning sun shone down from the horizon and sprinkled on the silver-white ship, Yin Nuoxing took out the treasure map almost mechanically. He looked at the red dot on the map numbly. Just as he was about to put it away habitually, he was stunned for a moment. He stared at the red dot on the map. When he looked at the background under the red dot, his empty eyes surged with color. Meow, we're finally here. An excited shout woke the people on the ship from their cultivation state. The girl in purple seemed to be startled and was stunned for a long time before she came back to her senses. When she saw Yin Nuoxing dancing with joy, she couldn't help but purse her lips and smile. We're here. Yuanshi exited from his cultivation state. He propped himself up on the ship's deck and nudged his butt to Yin Nuoxing's side. He glanced at the treasure map and heaved a sigh of relief. He smiled bitterly and said, we're finally here. 1 month is neither long nor short. Why does it feel especially long this time? Nuoxing, why don't you use the light element next time? Hearing this, Yin Nuoxing stopped and let out a strange laugh. Tilting his head, he looked at Yuanshi and said, I wonder which guy told me to slow down because he couldn't stand the light element. When Yuanshi heard this, he suddenly felt a little embarrassed. When they first came up from the bottom of the sea, it was indeed him who told Yin Nuoxing not to use the speed of light to travel. Xian stretched lazily. Her beautiful figure was wrapped in her dress, showing off her perfect curves. A certain two people on the ship stared straight at her. When she was about to turn her gaze, they suddenly looked away. Is this the entrance to the ruins? Xian yawned and said somewhat lazily. Yin Nuoxing coughed dryly and looked at the sea in front of them. He said, this is a little in front of the entrance to the ruins. I don't dare to drive directly into the ruins. Something will happen. After all, this was an area that was classified as being on the same level as the Forbidden Zone. It would be dangerous to casually barge in. Even a high-ranking god wouldn't dare to walk in with his hands in his pockets. Yin Nuoxing's evil spirit, I passed through the thick seawater and looked straight underwater. She was stunned. What came into view was an ancient and glorious palace complex. It looked like a temple used for worship. Countless huge stone pillars rose from the seabed, and the green leaves of time climbed up the palace complex. The swaying seaweed was like a pendulum, and the corners of the spirit beast totems were reflected in the stone pillars. Although it was called a temple, it looked more like an ancient city that had stood for thousands of years without falling. Even if it was covered by plants, one could still see its former majesty. The white jade buildings were endless, and the walls that were several meters high divided the ancient city into many areas. The giant palace in the center revealed a prehistoric aura, and the ancient energy pressure made people breathless. It was as majestic as a god, but lonely, and people couldn't help but worship it. Yin Nuoxing swallowed his saliva and looked away. He couldn't help but continue to look. He quickly scanned the city, wanting to engrave it in his heart. Wong. However, he didn't look for long before his vision suddenly became blurry. The scene in front of his eyes dissipated like bubbles and melted into the water. This sudden change shocked Yin Nuoxing. Before he could react, his entire vision had become pitch black. He couldn't see anything, and only darkness existed that could devour life. Yin Nuoxing's first reaction was to close his evil spirit eye. When he opened it again, what he saw was still an azure blue ocean. There was also a faintly discernible dark green at the bottom of the ocean. He was stunned for a moment because he remembered that the last scene he saw was pitch black, as if his vision had been blocked. Seeing that he could see clearly without using his evil spirit eye, Yin Nuoxing scratched his head in confusion. He opened his evil spirit eye again and stared at the ruins under the ocean. However, he could only see darkness. It was so dark that it made his whole body shiver. However, when he raised his head, he could see a normal scenery. What's going on? This strange phenomenon caused him to be stunned. Although his vision had been blocked by the aura of the rocks in the past, he didn't expect that this ruins would also have such an indescribable aura that blocked his evil spirit eye. Furthermore, the blocking was very thorough. He couldn't see anything at all, as if he was blind. Could it be that there was something in this ancient city? Yin Nuoxing tilted his head, his eyes casually swaying. When he looked down, he saw balls of dark green energy, causing him to be a little startled as he muttered, "The aura of life? The aura of life? There's people? Or fish?" After Yuanshi heard this, he was stunned. Although he didn't hear this term often, he could immediately distinguish it and quickly asked, "It should be humans, right?" Yin Nuoxing scratched his head and said, "I'm not too sure. I only feel that this green aura of life should belong to the human race. The merfolk's aura is dark blue." Of course, he knew what Yuanshi was referring to by fish. That's strange. Wasn't this place also said to be a land of death? Why would there be people running here? Shouldn't they be avoiding it? Yuanshi said doubtfully. How would I know? Yin Nuoxing curled his lips. He looked at the ancient city below, then looked down at the bottom of the ocean where he couldn't see anything. He sighed and said, "We'll know once we take a look. No matter what it is, they're living things down there." What a casual guy. Yuanshi rolled his eyes and said, since they had decided to take action, the few of them didn't delay. They carried the two girls who were meditating, then took a deep breath. Yin Nuoxing twisted his neck and said with a smile, "Let's go. It's been a long time since we last went to the sea." Splash! After Yin Nuoxing finished speaking, he plunged into the sea. Behind him, Yuanshi smiled bitterly and quickly jumped into the sea as well. As waves splashed on the surface of the sea became lifeless once again. It was as silent as death. Under the clear blue sea, a few huge bubbles floated to the surface of the water from time to time. The dark green palace walls were like a group of solemn guards, guarding the ancient city and driving away all life that came close to the ancient city. The swaying seaweed and corals reflected colorful shapes under the water. Accompanied by naughty shoals of fish, they looked like a group of dancing girls. The ancient city stood on the seabed, and one's gaze moved along its structure. Gradually, one's gaze drifted to the huge trench On the other seabed, there were many dilapidated buildings. Just like the solemn, ancient city, they were all covered by dark green seaweed. Although the number was much less compared to the ancient city, they were separated by the two sides of the trench. It was as if a divine sword had split the seabed into two, and even a part of the ancient city was cut open. The trench also perfectly turned the ancient city into a peninsula. The ancient city was built on a cliff, and surrounding it was a sea abyss. It was as if it was built on the top of a cliff, guarding the border. The surrounding terrain was lower and lower. The entire ancient city was roughly divided into 3 levels. It was at least 1,000 feet high, and the top was about 100 meters away from touching the surface of the water. The corals and seaweed grew around the ruins and had already become a part of the ruins. There was nothing strange about it at all. On the lowest level, there was a broken bridge that protruded out of the ancient city. There were about 10 young people standing on it. They were all dressed in black, with the word "Yi" written in flamboyant calligraphy on their backs. They were no stranger to Yun Nuoxing's attire, which symbolized their status. It was the symbol of the well-known Nightwalker Alliance. These people looked to be about 20 years old, but their auras were very strong. They were obviously not ordinary people, especially the young man standing at the front. He stood there casually, but his aura surged naturally, causing the water to seem to solidify. Even the space around him was slightly distorted. These people seemed to want to go into the ruins to take a look, but they were not in a hurry to act. The young man in the lead had his hands behind his back. His small beard made him look like a lion. His eyes were staring at the ruins in front of him without blinking. He was motionless, as if he was in a hunting state, ready to pounce on his prey at any time and give it a fatal blow. Those are people from the Nightwalker Alliance. Behind a small mountain that was separated from the ancient city by a trench, Yun Nuoxing and the others suddenly poked their heads out and looked at the people on the broken bridge from afar. The familiar symbol made them startled. Yes, it's them. Yuanqi nodded. Although he was a little surprised, he did not seem too surprised. The people of the Nightwalker Alliance often went to some dangerous places to look for forgotten ruins, history, and some rare treasures. Everyone knew about this kind of thing. It was not surprising to see them outside the Forbidden Zone. Then why don't they go in? Yun Nuoxing scratched her head and asked. It is said that this ruin has a protective array. It seems that there is also a barrier. I'm not sure. They are probably waiting for the barrier to dissipate. Yuanqi thought for a while and said. While they were talking, a black shadow suddenly rushed out from the empty ruins, causing Yun Nuoxing and the others to shift their attention and quickly check it out. The person who came out was also a young man. His majestic aura completely covered his body, pushing away the surrounding seawater. After he rushed out of the ruins, he quickly came to the group of people from the Nightwalker Alliance. Then he stood beside the young man in the lead and respectfully clasped his hands. Leader, the barrier of the ruins has indeed dissipated. Moreover, it must have dissipated for a period of time. There are not even many traces of energy left. The young man who came out said. Hearing this, the young man nodded. He raised his head and looked at the ruins of the huge ancient city that was thousands of feet high. He muttered to himself, the holy city of the Merfolk clan. We have waited for 300 years. Finally, we can enter safely. The holy city of the Merfolk clan? Yun Nuoxing was stunned. It is said that the Merfolk clan was still a large group. When they were not divided into so many branches, the city left behind by the first Merfolk god in history was protected by the Merfolk clan as a sacred place. In their eyes, this city was as sacred as the residence of a god. Its name was, Yuanqi said softly. However, when he said the name, he frowned. It seemed that he could not remember the name of this so-called holy city of the Merfolk clan. It was the capital of life. The Merfolk, god who became a god, was the god of life. Just as Yuanqi was racking his brains, Lan Exener, who had not spoken for a long time, suddenly appeared and said something. The god of life. Yun Nuoxing wrinkled his nose. Since Lan Exener knew about it, this so-called capital of life should have existed since the mythological era. However, everyone present had seen many relics of the gods. Hence, When they heard Lan Xian Er's words, they were not too surprised even if they guessed this. After saying this, Lan Xian retreated into Yun Nuoxing's body. Yun Nuoxing smiled bitterly. Ever since he refined the colored glazed divine crystal in his soul, Lan Xian rarely came out. This was because she had hidden in his soul and refined it together with Ziyi. Even though they refined it day and night, there was still no reaction from the colored glazed divine crystal. However, before we go in, let's entertain the guests first. When Yun Nuoxing and the others were muttering, the young man slowly turned around. His eyes stared straight at the short mountain in the distance. Then, he smiled slightly, which surprised Yun Nuoxing. He did not expect to be discovered at such a distance, and even after concealing his aura, "We are exposed." Yuan, she smiled bitterly. Chapter 389. Yin Nuoxing scratched his head and laughed dryly. Well, after all, he's a netherworld king. It's useless no matter how hard we try to hide, unless the heaven-grade netherworld weapons are in perfect condition. Now, the netherworld ruined sword and the others can't sense us. Friend from afar, why don't you come out for a chat? The ruins are world-class cultural relics that everyone in the world can see. You may not believe me, but can you believe in the badge on my back? The young man who looked like a lion transmitted his voice again, causing the surrounding sea to echo with his voice. He wanted Yin Nuoxing and the others to come out. Hearing this determined voice, Yin Nuoxing was stunned. He didn't understand why this person wanted to see them. However, he wasn't worried. Although the Nightwalker Alliance was a little strange, it was still an open and upright alliance. They probably wouldn't do things like killing and robbing. Thinking of this, he nodded, turned around, and rolled his eyes at the others. Then he walked out first. Xian and the others saw this and hesitated for a moment before walking out from behind the small mountain. When the young man saw the few figures walking out from behind the small mountain, he raised his head slightly and took a closer look. A hint of surprise flashed past the depths of his eyes. It seemed that something was out of his expectations. However, this expression was hidden before anyone could see it. Since he had already shown himself, Yin Nuoxing simply swam towards the young man. As soon as his feet stepped on the broken bridge, the people of the Nightwalker Alliance suddenly stood in 2 rows with their hands behind their backs. Their eyes were filled with determination as they looked diagonally upwards. They formed a passage, placing Yin Nuoxing and the others and the young man in the middle. The sudden grand formation gave Yin Nuoxing a shock. Looking at them, it seemed that they were just short of kneeling and kowtowing in unison and shouting, "Welcome, young master." However, the young man didn't have any special reaction. It seemed that this way of welcoming guests was also a unique way of the Nightwalker Alliance. The 2 of them looked at each other with a distance of a few meters between them. Neither of them spoke. Yin Nuoxing didn't know what to say. He could only reach out and poke Yuanqi behind him, implying that he should hurry up and say something. The atmosphere was so awkward. "Little guys, what are you doing in the ruins? It's very dangerous here. It's not a place where you little brats should come to." In the end, it was the young man who started the conversation, which made the others feel relieved. "We also want to enter the ruins to take a look." Yin Nuoxing smiled sweetly, causing goosebumps to appear all over her body. The few people who were watching by the side couldn't help but shudder. Oh my God, this smile, why was it even more terrifying than a sinister smile? "Uncle, can you tell us more about this ruin?" Yin Nuoxing smiled sweetly again. She looked like she was only 14 or 15 years old, and her eyes were always flickering with an innocent look. She also looked like a girl and spoke sweetly. Maybe if she was in a good mood, her desire to protect him would increase greatly, and she would bring him to explore the ruins. With a Netherworld King expert accompanying him, his safety would be much higher. Of course, this was what Violet Knight had told him. With his personality, he would never say something so disgusting. Goosebumps appeared all over his body. Xian and the others also couldn't stand his sweet words, and their bodies trembled countless times. The young man felt a little awkward when he heard this, but he didn't feel too uncomfortable. After listening to Yin Nuoxing's words, He frowned and then closed his eyes. He seemed to be thinking about something, but also seemed to be sensing something. The aura flowing around his body retracted back into his body, causing the latter to stick out her tongue and not disturb him. After all, bringing along a few burdens was actually quite troublesome. If they weren't careful, they might even be in danger. After a long while, the young man slowly opened his eyes and stared straight at Yun Nuoxing's chest, the pendant under her chest. Then, he took a deep breath, turned his gaze to her eyes, and said, "Little guy, do you have a token of our Nightwalker Alliance?" "Token?" Yun Nuoxing stared blankly. The young man nodded and saw her doubts. He stretched out his hand and wiped the bracelet. Then, a yellow token appeared in his hand. The young man stretched out his hand so that Yun Nuoxing could see a little more clearly. The token was in the shape of a shield, and the word Yi was written in a flamboyant style in the center. It was very charming. Seeing this slightly familiar token, Yun Nuoxing stared blankly for a moment. She seemed to have seen this token somewhere before, but she couldn't remember where she had seen it. Yuan-Shi saw her pondering appearance and was also startled. He didn't know that Yun Nuoxing had a relationship with the people of the Nightwalker Alliance, because he had never heard her mention it. However, the Nine Elements Temple often talked about it. It seems... Her eyes suddenly stopped moving. Yun Nuoxing suddenly raised her head and looked at the familiar token for a while. A scene from her memory emerged. It was in a red valley when she, Yu-In, and Ming were traveling together. They saved a person named He-Hai. It seemed that He-Hai gave her an azure token. It seemed that He-Hai also wrote the word Yi on it. It looked similar. Could it be that they were the same? Yun Nuoxing touched her nose and thought for a while. Then, she took out the token that He-Hai gave her and showed it to the young man. The moment she saw the token, the young man suddenly stared with her dead fish eyes. She swallowed her saliva with difficulty and sucked in a breath of cold air. She looked at Yun Nuoxing with bewilderment, as if she had seen something terrifying. Boom! The people standing on both sides suddenly knelt on one knee. Even though they were in the sea, the sound of the heavy impact could still be heard clearly. It gave Yun Nuoxing and the others a fright. After the shock, the young man quivered and hurriedly took a step back. She bowed and cupped her hands. Cold sweat flowed down her face. The sudden change made Yun Nuoxing, who hadn't recovered from her shock, panic. A god and underworld expert knelt on the ground to welcome her, and a king of hell expert bowed her head. What kind of monster would receive such treatment? Just when he was at a loss of what to do, the young man's shout stunned them even more. "Greetings, Great Elder." Just those 3 words made Yun Nuoxing's jaw drop. Great Elder? The dying person she had casually saved was actually the famous Great Elder of the Nightwalker Alliance in the Myriad God Realm. Seeing the token was the same as seeing the person. As long as Yun Nuoxing held the token given to her by He-Hai, she would be able to enjoy the treatment of being the Great Elder of the Nightwalker Alliance. For a power that covered the entire Myriad God Realm and controlled half of the resources, this title could be said to have the power to summon the wind and summon the rain. Only by standing at such a height could one understand the meaning of monstrous authority. "No!" Yun Nuoxing suddenly shouted in a low voice, pulling herself out of her imagination. She shook her head fiercely and looked at the young man who had his head lowered. She hurriedly said, "Get up. No, please get up. Oh no. Senior, please get up. There must be some misunderstanding." Although this title was very tempting, Yun Nuoxing wouldn't use it for no reason and with a clear conscience. As the saying goes, weight can crush people to death. This subordinate definitely wouldn't mistake the Great Elder's token. Every token given to the Elders of the Nightwalker Alliance is unique. The young man still bowed with his head lowered. His words were sonorous and forceful, completely treating Yun Nuoxing, who was standing in front of him, as the Great Elder of the Nightwalker Alliance. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't even know what to do. The Great Elder has been missing for many years and has only returned to the Alliance not long ago. Little brother, since you have received the Great Elder's token, it means that the Great Elder has acknowledged you. The Great Elder has also mentioned you in the meeting. Little brother, you don't have to be so restrained. Those who have joined the Alliance are all family. If you want to enter the ruins, you must let this subordinate accompany you. It will be my supreme honor to be able to help you. The young man stood up straight, placed his palm flat on his chest, and said very respectfully, Elder, please give the order. The people on both sides suddenly stood up straight like pillars and shouted in a loud and respectful voice. Yin Nuashing was dumbfounded. He kept muttering in his heart, that strange fellow, why did he mention him for no reason? He had nothing to say. He had just casually saved a person. Was there a need to give him such a valuable gift? Moreover, now that he thought about it, he didn't even know if his rescue measures were useful. To be able to get this title, be worshipped by the Underworld King experts, and make the Underworld God experts so loyal to him. This Ihai should be an expert at the peak of the Underworld Emperor level, or even an Emperor God level expert. Would the healing done by an expert of that level, when he was still a mere mortal, really work? However, no matter what happened back then, he had indeed received the Great Elder's token from Ihai, and there were more than 10 God experts around him for no reason. The safety factor in entering the ruins was indeed much higher. Yin Nuashing thought about it, sighed, and reluctantly accepted it. He didn't care about anything else. Now that he wanted to explore the ruins, he would use these people as his bodyguards. All right, then please lend us a hand. After thinking for a long time, Yin Nuashing could only say this sentence, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Elder, you're too kind. Everyone shouted in unison. Looking at the few people who had changed from strangers to subordinates in just a few minutes, Xian and the others didn't know what to say. Therefore, they could only open their eyes, look left and right, and then laugh bitterly. The tokens of the Nightwalker Alliance, from low to high, have the following colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, purple, and gold. The Great Elder's token is indigo, and it also has a trace of the Elder's own aura, so we can sense it. Even if it is hidden in an artifact, the tokens can still resonate with each other. After deciding on the itinerary, Yin Nuashing and the others didn't procrastinate. They pulled the young man along as they listened to his introduction. The young man's name was Mo Yinhua, and he was an elder in the Nightwalker Alliance. However, his position was much lower than Ihai's. This time, they came to the ruins on Ihai's orders to investigate. As for whether they could enter or not, it was up to them to improvise. The token is a symbol of identity. With the token, you can also get help from the Nightwalker Alliance, from asking for directions to seeking revenge. Everything is not a problem. As long as you have enough authority, the Alliance can solve everything, Mo Yinhua said. Yin Nuashing laughed dryly. To be able to help in seeking revenge, this involved a wide range of things. It was even too wide. Chapter 390. Haunted. Yin Nuashing was stunned. For cultivators like them, ghosts were actually a kind of living creature formed by yin qi. They usually existed in places with extreme yin qi, such as cemeteries. Although water was yin qi, and the ocean was also a place where yin qi was slightly stronger, it was not strong enough to give birth to yin spirits. Of course, there was another saying. The so-called haunted was the soul. Because the resentment left behind in its life had turned into an evil spirit, it refused to dissipate and still stayed in the world, causing trouble everywhere. What kind of trouble? Yin Nuashing knocked on his head. He really couldn't think of a group of yin spirits floating at the bottom of the sea, or a group of souls that hadn't dissipated. So he had to ask. Well, actually, I'm not too sure. Those who know about this are all dead, Mo Yinhua said faintly. Dead? Yin Nuashing shuddered. What do you mean by those who know about this are all dead? It means literally, before the boundary dissipates, no one who breaks into the ruins will survive. From the moment they enter, it's equivalent to being sentenced to death. No matter how strong a person is or how high their divinity is, they will all be buried inside and turn into another resentful spirit in the ruins. They will wander around for thousands or even tens of thousands of years without dissipating, Mo Yinhua said. Yin Nuoxing swallowed a mouthful of saliva. The Nightwalker Alliance was the organization with the widest influence. The information they had was also irreplaceable. Since this elder had said so, then there should not be any problems. Moreover, he had heard many rumors on the way here. He could also judge that the danger level of the ruins might not be inferior to the life forbidden zone. While Yin Nuo and the others were talking, they were gradually approaching the first level of the ruins. The lower level was like a courtyard, divided into square areas by a few towering walls. Green moss and seaweed could be seen everywhere, and the tattered wall had collapsed to one side, blocking the door. There was no trace of life, and when the soles of their feet stepped on the road, a thick layer of dust splashed up. It seemed that no one had set foot here for tens of millions of years. The city wall and the buildings here were a bit taller than common buildings. However, mermen were originally larger than humans in size. Therefore, the buildings here were a bit different in size. However, compared to the buildings on the upper level, which were thousands of meters high, the buildings on the lower level were like small courtyards which didn't seem to be used for living. The square compartment was empty. Only after a few compartments could they see a round bronze jar. It was 1 meter tall and was embedded in the ground. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't pull it out. It seemed to be firmly attached to the ruins and couldn't be removed. Besides this bronze jar, there was nothing else in the lower level of the building. There's nothing here. Yin Nuoxing looked back at the slightly dilapidated lower building and couldn't help but say, "Yes, there is nothing." Mo Yinhua sighed and nodded in disappointment. However, after sighing, he smiled and said, "Have you heard of the division of the demon race?" "What?" Yin Nuoxing shook her head. The demon race, as a whole, is similar to the magical beasts. One of the most important divisions is bloodline. The bloodline of the ancient king is the highest status in the demon realm, which is what we call the upper-level demon race. They're the noblest. As for the other demon races, some of them have regressed from the upper-level demon race. The large and small groups have been divided into many different names, forming the demon realm that we know today. The mermen are also part of the demon race, but they don't belong to the upper-level demon race anymore. Even the royal family's bloodline is much thinner than in ancient times. Mo Yinhua paused and said, "However, the term upper level still means noblest among the demon race, just like the ruins on the third level. Even if it's a precious thing, it should be placed on the upper level, right?" Yin Nuoxing continued when she saw that he stopped talking. Mo Yinhua hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. It seemed that there was something that he didn't understand and didn't want to give an ambiguous answer. Even after walking through the entire lower level, Yin Nuoxing and the others still couldn't find anything. There are no ancient words, no sealed holy objects, just an empty shell. However, they also saw some traces that were easy to miss. There should have been something buried in these places. These traces also had traces of movement. It was messy, as if someone was fleeing, casually moving things and escaping. The stairs leading to the middle level were at the easternmost level of the lower level. At the front of the long, slanted stairs, there were 2 stone pillars carved with totems. They were already covered in moss. Long aquatic plants grew on top of one of the stone pillars, while a third of the other pillar had collapsed in front of the stone steps, blocking the stairs. The stairs leading to the middle level were divided into left and right sides. A huge, unknown pattern was drawn on the rock in the middle, separating the stairs. Now more than half of it was covered by moss. No one present recognized the pattern. Huh. When they reached the middle level, Yin Nuoxing suddenly stopped and turned around, startling the people behind him. Then, they hurriedly operated their elements and quickly turned around, vigilantly looking around, but they didn't see anything. "What's wrong?" Mo Yinhua, who was walking at the front, also hurriedly stopped and ran to Yin Nuoxing and the others, protecting them behind him, and then asked. Yin Nuoxing frowned and said, "After the enchantment dissipated, no one came in, right?" "That's right." Mo Yinhua was stunned and said, The enchantment sealed the middle level and the upper level. The lower level can be entered, but this sea area hasn't been visited for 2 months. 2 months ago, the enchantment didn't dissipate. We came here 10 days ago and have been squatting on the lower level, but we didn't sense any life aura. Then, Yin Nuoxing's brows were almost knitted together. He walked to the middle of the stairs leading to the upper level and slowly squatted down. He pointed at the dust on the ground that was pushed to the sides and said, "What left this trace?" Hearing this, Mo Yinhua also squatted down and looked at the place Yin Nuoxing pointed at, frowning. The ruins that hadn't been visited for thousands of years had been occupied by moss and dust. A light step on it would raise a cloud of dust, leaving a perfect footprint. However, the stone slab here was unusually clean. From the traces, it seemed that something had swept past it. In this shape, Yin Nuoxing and the others could only think of a fishtail, a mermaid's tail. Moreover, this trace extended all the way up from the block stairs. It swept past the stairs Yin Nuoxing and the others took, and then spread to the upper level. It doesn't seem like it. Mermaids can't use their fishtails to walk, right? Yuanshi shook his head and said, "It's more like a snake." "The curved traces are very similar to a snake," Xian said after thinking for a while. Mo Yinhua frowned. This was because in the past 10 days, they hadn't sensed any strong or weak life aura. In other words, no living creature had visited this place. Moreover, souls wouldn't leave traces on the floor. In this way, the ghosts in the ruins shouldn't have anything to do with this. However, other than these, he really couldn't think of any other explanation. Unless it was left 10 days ago, but the traces seemed to be left by someone recently, or a powerhouse of that level came personally, and it was a powerhouse of the mermaid race. Only a powerhouse of that level could conceal their source of life, so that Mo Yinhua, who was a powerhouse of the Netherworld King, couldn't sense it. Yin Nuoxing knocked on his head. His finger gently brushed across the floor. He put it in front of his nose and sniffed. Then he was stunned. A familiar smell. Yin Nuoxing murmured softly. No one else heard it. "This smell has a little bit of darkness. I seem to have smelled it from somewhere." Yin Nuoxing frowned. He didn't have much contact with this smell, with the power of darkness. It should be said that he hadn't come into contact with anyone with this kind of power. He might have seen something by accident during his travels. After a while, Yin Nuoxing suddenly raised his head. An image appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but spit out a name from his mouth. Tao Tai. When they were outside the Tana's water god temple, they saw the huge shadow of Tao Tai. If they hadn't used the whirlpool zither, they might have been annihilated there. At that time, when they were fighting against the shadow of Tao Tai, the energy that lingered between heaven and earth seemed to be the kind of energy with the smell of darkness. The difference was that the smell of darkness here, even if it was just a remnant, was countless times stronger than that of the shadow outside the temple. Could it be that there was a real Tao Tai in the capital of life, a ferocious beast left behind from the ancient times? Gulp. Thinking of this, Yin Nuoxing couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. If that kind of thing really revived, their group would probably die. This trip would become their closing performance. Jin Wang said that every time Tao Tai revived, all the powerhouses in the world would come out. In the end, even if a celestial powerhouse appeared, they could only seal it. They couldn't completely destroy it. In order to maintain the stability of the realm of the gods, the last thing Yin Nuoxing did was to strengthen the seal on it. And if they encountered this thing that even the celestial powerhouses were afraid of, even if he used the whirlpool zither, he might not be able to escape with everyone. Even if a celestial powerhouse came, it would be useless. How could a guy with a godhead weapon like him resist? "What's wrong? Your face is pale." The first to notice that something was wrong with Yin Nuoxing was Xian. Seeing his handsome face pale, she couldn't help but be stunned. She crouched down beside him and asked with concern, her lily-white hand gently stroking his forehead. The slightly cool touch pulled Yin Nuoxing back from his fantasy. He took a light breath and came back to his senses. Looking at the pretty face that was only a few inches away from him, he smiled, indicating that he was fine. Pulling Xian to stand up, Yin Nuashing looked at Mo Yinhua and asked carefully, "That elder, do you know about the four beasts?" "For beasts?" Hearing this name, Mo Yinhua's face froze in an instant, and a very deep fear flashed through the depths of his eyes. Yin Nuashing saw it clearly, and he couldn't help but be speechless. He didn't expect that just hearing the name could make a god so scared. What did these four fiendish beasts do in the end? Well, I just want to ask, the four beasts are still in a sealed state and haven't woken up yet. Does Elder know where they are sealed? Yin Nuashing asked. Sealed place? His stiff face was covered up in an instant. And Mo Yinhua came back to his senses, and after thinking for a long time, he said, "Among the four beasts, except for Tao Tai, who has a specific sealed place, the other three have not been mentioned. Moreover, the other three have not been seen for a long time. The last time they were seen was in the previous era, the ancient era. Where is Tao Tai sealed?" Yin Nuashing was stunned. How could there be no news? Let me think. And Mo Yinhuan knocked on his head and thought for a long time. He glanced at Yin Nuashing hesitantly and said, "It's probably in the Kuan Yuan region, but I don't know the specific location." Hearing this, Yin Nuashing breathed a sigh of relief. Tao Tai was sealed in the Kuan Yuan region, and he didn't know whether the other three beasts were dead or alive. Just take it that it was dead. This dark smell should be something else, he thought so easily. I say, little brother, don't be stupid. These things are not fun. If there were two options, entering the forbidden zone of life and seeing Tao Tai, I would definitely choose the former without hesitation. The four beasts are existences that are not afraid of gods. Seeing his relaxed expression, Mo Yinhua immediately panicked and hurriedly reminded him, "Don't worry, I'm not interested in them." Hearing this, Yin Nuashing laughed involuntarily. Mo Yinhua thought that he wanted to find the four beasts. He just wanted to confirm what kind of ghosts were here. He was not interested in looking for those ghosts. "That's good," Mo Yinhua said. "Since ancient times, even god spirits have not been able to defeat them. If you see them in the future, you should avoid them." He patted his chest. He was clearly frightened. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.